Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Joint Committee on Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs. Those of you watching can look at our committee webpage for information on public comments. Should be on the legislative webpage. Mary Beth, go ahead and call roll, please.
Senator Anderson.
Here.
Senator Hutchings.
Here.
Senator Pappas.
Here.
Senator Steinmetz.
Here.
Representative Blake.
Here.
Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Craig.
Here.
Representative Laux.
Pardon me, here.
Representative McGuire.
Present.
Representative Newsom.
Here.
Representative Obermuller.
Here.
Representative Western.
He is excused. He'll be a little late coming to the meeting. Hopefully he'll make it later here.
Co-Chairman Von Slater.
He will be here as well. I'm not just sure. He had some previous commitments as well.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
Here. Okay, the first item on the agenda, the military department, General Porter. You're online here. The floor is yours.
Chairman, this is General Porter. I just barely caught the end. Did you want us to jump in yet, or do you have other business to do? Over.
Yeah. Trying to figure out this waiting room business. Yes, sir. What I'm going to give you the floor, and you go ahead and share with us the things you have for us.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Just for the record, my name is Major General Greg Porter, and I serve as the Adjutant General. I've got a few members of my team with me here today. We're going to try to get them on just to make sure that we can talk. If we could, members of the Wyoming Guard team, if you would introduce yourselves, make sure we got good audio. Over.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Brigadier General Steve Alkira, and I am the Director of the Joint Staff.
And Mr. Chairman, committee members, I'm Colonel Chris Smith, the Senior Military Attorney for the Military Department.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Mr. Shepard, if you would like to try your comms, please. I'm showing you muted.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Tim Shepard. I'm the Executive Director for the Wyoming Veterans Commission. Looking through here, I don't know if I see him on there yet, but we also have the Chairman of the Veterans Commission, Mr. Travis Detai, was going to join us.
All right. Thank you, team.
There he is. He's in a Darth Vader outfit.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, we'll go through the agenda unless there was some opening remarks or guidance from the committee that we needed to address before we went on, sir.
You know, it'll be a little different, so you won't be making any mistakes. We just had one little botch up here. My co-chairman was in the waiting room as well and couldn't get into the meeting, so that's why. Welcome, Michael. Anyway, it'll be a little different than it was. If any committee members need to interrupt to talk about things, we'll unmic ourselves and talk to you, and otherwise just go ahead with the information that you have. And this is a whole new thing for all of us.
Yes, sir. I think Chairman Von Flater's got us all beat in terms of background back there, so he's got the deal. All right, sir. Good morning again, members of the committee. Thought thought we would give you a quick break in between Director Reiner and Department of Transportation before you have to talk about orange cones and compaction rates and all that good stuff again. Thought we'd give you a quick update on what's going on in the military department during COVID. We'll follow that up with a review of veteran services. Really, just to remind you, what that was a letter from the Joint Appropriations Committee asking us once again to take a look to see if there were other ways to potentially fund veteran service officers and if we're doing that correctly. So we'll have a brief little response to that for your consideration. From there, we'll move to our statutory reports. The state military code, retention incentives for folks for our members of the force, another look at potentially out-of-state benefits for our guardsmen. Then we also have some updates on the skilled nursing facility, Challenge Academy, and then a couple of issues you asked us to take a look at in terms of impacts on from Senate File 36 on the military requirements when we were looking at the wind farms and that sort of thing, and then a joint resolution regarding oxygen treatment for traumatic brain injuries. So I think that's what will take us through the time that we have this morning with you. If I could take you through, that's the first slide on the agenda. I apologize, I didn't put slide numbers on these, so I'll try to keep everybody up. So that was the agenda slide. The next one will be the military opening remarks, military update slide, if that is helpful. And please, if I get off, please just let me know and I'll get you on there. Hey, first off, I just wanted to say congratulations and let everybody know I've got our exec here, Major Moon. Major Moon is getting married tomorrow. So she asked that I be expeditious in my briefing to you today so that she can get on with her wedding and getting that stuff going. So we'll do that. But she's getting married tomorrow, and in true military fashion, you know, her husband's going to leave for a year in about 30 days after that. So we'll do that. So we'll get that done. Let me talk to Air Guard deployments. We are prepared and ready to go with the modular airborne firefighting system for this summer. The crews already went through their training down in Colorado Springs about 3 weeks ago, and they're certified, and we're ready to support fires when that happens, probably this summer. As I've been telling you, we continue to deploy over both services. The Army deployed about a third of its force structure this last year, and we're starting to get those folks back, and I'll talk to them in a little bit. But now that the Army's coming back, the air is starting to deploy. So we've got about 141 personnel scheduled to go out this summer into different parts of the area of operations over there. All of those folks, though, will be back by the first part of August. All 4 aircraft tails that we have currently deployed and the personnel will be back first part of August. So we'll have 8 C-130s back in the state at that time. We will still continue to deploy, though. We'll have about 135 folks scattered out over the summer that are deploying in different size chunks. And we expect them to, they'll be deploying anywhere from 4 months to 6 months as they go. We did start getting some folks back. We deployed last March from the Air Guard about 100 folks. We got about half of those back. 45 of them came back. They're just finishing up their quarantine right now that they did in their homes, and we should be getting them back in formations here very shortly. Let me talk to the Army Guard. As I said, we're starting to get those home. G Company, which was our medevac guys, are back from Afghanistan. Det 6, which was our C-12, our one fixed wing asset on the Army side, they're back from Afghanistan. And then Charlie Battery, 2nd or 300th, was stationed over in country. That was our HIMARS battery, and they've made it back into home station. We still have 2 significant groups over there, the 115th Field Artillery Brigade. They're stationed all across the Middle East right now, and their job really was to control fires for Operation Spartan Shield, OSS over there. And they've been doing a great job. And it looks like, though, they're going to be delayed about 30 days from coming home. When COVID hit, all the strategic lift sort of changed dramatically. So although they didn't get hung up by their replacements, they are getting hung up coming out of theater because there's just not enough lift and transportation to get them out. So we're thinking it's about a 30-day delay, and we expect them back from Fort Bliss about the middle of July, maybe towards the end of July, how things are going. So they'll be coming back. A Battery is, we think they were a couple of weeks behind the brigade in deployment, about a month behind the brigade in deployment. We think they're going to be able to come back on track. So they may hit home station here in Wyoming about the same time that the brigade is. And so at that point, we'll have returned just about all of our Army Guard folks back into the state, and with the exception of some single individuals doing some separate missions, we'll be back and ready to go. We'll talk about real quick on projects. If I move down the slide, probably the biggest one is the Regional Training Institute. That is complete now, and we're going to do a ribbon cutting in Guernsey on the 15th of July. You'll all be invited to that if you can make it, and obviously conditions exist. Hopefully it'll be nice enough for us to be able to spread out very well up there, but it should be a great event. It's going to be designated to General Esme and his family. His grandsons and family members are going to come up for that event, and we'll dedicate that building to the Esme family and General Esme, who was the longest serving adjutant general in Wyoming's history, served a little over 32 years. So we'll get that done on the 15th. Just in terms of a military department flood posture right now, I'm knocking on wood, but right now it appears that floods look pretty good. There'll be some localized flooding, but not sure it's going to threaten infrastructure, and I'm not sure that it'll be enough to cause much support from the Guard, if any. It looks pretty good. It looks like it's going to come off. The snow's going to come off like it should, and we shouldn't have some of the issues that we had maybe back in 2011 and 2014. So that looks good. Cowboy Challenge Academy, as I think many of you are aware, we had to suspend operations when COVID hit, and we are currently working through the county health officer in Platte County and the office of or the Department of Health here in Wyoming to see how we bring those folks, if we can in fact bring those folks back. The intent right now is about the 6th of July to do that, if we're able to, if conditions exist to make that possible. But that's our intent, is to start Challenge Academy back up. We'll do that really with 2 classes. We'll finish up the class that we had to suspend. It'll take about 6 weeks to do that, and then we'll go on with class 42, who will be there for the entire 22 weeks to get that policed up.
Jeremy, would this be a good time to pause and see if the committee has any questions? I would have one, so I'm not sure I understood. You'll be bringing back the cadets and finishing their academy work right away, or when will that happen?
Yeah, 6th July, sir, is what we're intending to do. If conditions exist, if county health officer and state health officer believe our plan is robust enough to bring them back, that's the plan.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any other questions? Okay, General, continue on.
All right, well, we'll move to the next slide. The next slide is talking COVID-19 response updates. And really just wanted to give you a quick few minutes of what we did in terms of response during COVID. Probably the most visible, that picture on the right-hand side is members of our civil support team, the CST. They've been attached to the state health lab for the past, I'd say 60 days now, assisting in sampling and doing the tests with our state health lab. So they've been doing a great job. They were one of the first civil support teams in the nation to do testing, and as such, they received just recently some more equipment to be able to do that. Actually, increase the capability of our testing by about 300 more per day. As of yesterday, they've tested a little over 1,100 samples, which again puts them really high in the nation in terms of samples. We were actually testing more samples than the New York CST team at just last week. So they've been very busy and doing a great job for the state over there. We also assisted in the COVID interagency working group that was stood up by the governor and headed up by the Secretary of State. Really, it was that attempt to make sure that everybody was synchronized across the state government with the COVID response. That's starting to wane now. We initially had about 12 planners from the military department assisting with that effort. We're down to about 2, General Alkire and Major Kanish, and that's starting to wind down a little bit as the planning phase of this has started to. We've got a pretty good handle on it. We also have a state response coordination cell. That's really the unified command. That's the Department of Health, and that's Wyoming Office of Homeland Security. We have LNOs into that group to assist them in planning and just to keep us surprised of what's going on with the National Guard. WOS and Health have been doing a great job as the unified command, and we've just been there to assist when necessary. We did have some members of our Air National Guard actually get activated on Title 10 and moved out to Indo-PACOM or to support PACAF, Pacific Air Force's Indo-PACOM at Travis Air Force Base. If you recall, quite a bit of the naval ships had high infection rates. And so this 9-person medical team went out to Travis Air Force Base in California to assist in bringing all those sailors and personnel off those ships and giving them COVID treatment. So they've been there for about 30 days now. I expect they'll probably be there another 30, perhaps 60 more days before they come back. We just got a note from their commander, said they're doing a great job and everything's doing well. One thing I don't have on the slide, but I thought I'd mention is Afton at our Readiness Center in Afton will be doing some food distribution. Senator Dockstetter really sort of made us aware of that mission and worked that through WOS and company. And so probably here in June, we'll be doing some food distribution out of the Afton Readiness Center. CARES Act, which has been on everybody's mind. Wyoming, the Guard as a whole, not just the Wyoming National Guard, has a different pot of money on CARES Act funding. And like a lot of, though, is really targeted to some specific things. The Air requested about 180,000 of that. About 50,000 of that has started to flow in and they're starting to execute. The Army had about 194,000. I suspect that we'll get that money this next week and start putting that to good use. What that looks like is, additional hand washing stations, some sneeze guards, some PPE for the force, those kind of things that we didn't have prior to COVID. I think that's all I had in terms of a military update. Can I answer some questions? I see Senator Anderson there, Mr. Chairman, but I'm not sure of the protocol these days.
Senator Anderson, go ahead. You have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, on that Air National Guard, you've got 3 numbers: requested, validated, and received. Is there some reason to think you'll only get the validated dollars?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, there could be. We keep going back and basically revalidating every time. So because some of the stuff we ask for, they say, hey, listen, we're not really sure that meets the COVID requirements. So I think we'll get to just about 180 by the end of the day as we sort of learn the rules and figure out the game plan. But that's sort of the process. We'll put one up. They'll say, yep, this meets it. This doesn't meet it. Then we'll make a better case or we'll come up with another plan.
Mr. Chairman,
Follow up.
follow up. So who's deciding that? Is that through the military or is that through the CARES Act?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, that is at National Guard Bureau. It is through the military side.
Oh,
Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Porter, I just, before this COVID-19, what was your supply of PPEs? And I know part of your mission is medical. I just wondered if you had ventilators available and are we stocking up on those kind of things? And that would be my question, General. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blake, We did have a stockage of, and I'll probably address it in two areas. The PPE, as part of our normal hazard response plan, we did have a stash of PPE. It probably wouldn't have lasted us a great amount of time. That's probably one of the things we'll take a look at as we do our after action reviews from this, to make sure that we have a little bit more than we did. But we did have a stockage of them, and we were able to respond with that. In terms of ventilators, we do have ventilators as part of our mission sets. We've got about 13 in the military department. We never did get to a point in Wyoming, or we haven't as yet, that we even looked at having to utilize those because of the ventilators capacity that we had in the state. But we do have some, and is part of both of our medical groups in the Army side and the air side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
See anyone else? I did have a question though. While you were evacuating patients out of the ships and other things that you did, you were able to escape serious infections within the Guard?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I don't believe our folks did too much of the evacuation piece of that out at Travis. They were really more the back end side of that. But I tell you, the number one thing that we looked at was force protection when we did start looking at COVID. And the number one thing was to keep the force intact so that we could respond. As a military department, we've had very few infections. I'm gonna say over the course of it, we've had probably 6 infections total. 2 of those were dependents, and then none of those ever required hospitalization or anything to that effect. And we certainly, most of those were done outside of, actually about half of them were outside of the state and in conjunction with civilian activities or civilian jobs. Really haven't had an incident where in the military department yet where we've infected one another from being together, that sort of thing.
Well, thank your people for managing both the defense of the country as well as the epidemic that we're in. There are no other questions from the committee, and I don't see any. Continue on, General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'd like to turn over to the review of veteran services, funding sources, and support options. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Tim Shepard and Chairman Detai to handle that.
Welcome, Colonel Shepard. You gentlemen go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I am on the slide, Veteran Service Organization, Department Service Officer Support. And really the issue, as General Porter described it, is was there from the Joint Appropriations Committee, is there another way to fund, to help fund DSOs, whether that be federal, non-governmental, whatever. And so first of all, I just need to go back to under discussion. I can't overstate the importance of the DSO role. And I'll talk a little bit on the next slide, how in some states that role is handled differently than we do it in Wyoming. But that role is critical to the process. And the processes of claims and appeals, and particularly when you get into the appeals process, you really need the department service officer role. So without funding support, we could lose 2 of the 3 DSOs that we have, and the 3 that we have again are the American Legion, the Disabled American Veterans or DAV, and then the Veterans of Foreign Wars or VFW. I will point out that claims I put on this slide that garners more than 40 million. I just did our update, and we presently at the end of March are reporting 27 million for the fiscal year, which will run through September 30th. So it looks like we're more on a glide path to bring in $50 million this year. And so when you look at the investment that we're talking about of 200,000, it's really relatively small in relation to the return of somewhere between 40 and $50 million a year. So my recommendation, or our recommendation, is to continue to augment the funding of the DSO positions. And I'll walk you through this a little bit more on the next slide, but I recommend that we close this study. Are there any questions on this slide, or I'll go to the Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yes, we do have a question here. Representative Brown, go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a real quick question for you, Tim. So you said you guys have 27 million brought in so far. How many people is that? What does that equate to on the amount of individuals that you guys have helped with that? I mean, 27 million seems like a lot of money. Just kind of curious how many people that it ultimately comes out to helping individually. You know, if we're looking at a $200,000 investment, what's our return on investment per person?
But Mr. Chairman, through you to Representative Brown, we know that there are approximately 48,000 veterans in Wyoming. What becomes difficult is that total number that are presently in the VA system, which is about 22,000. We know have some form of claims in the works, but actually any one of those 48,000 would be the high number. I'll say 22,000 is the low number.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I think I heard the speaker say that we had three positions we could lose: the Legion, the VFW, and the DAV. But the document here says the DAV is fully funded nationally. So are we going to lose that because the national funding is gone too?
Go ahead, Colonel.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Senator Anderson. Sir, we don't have any expectation that that position would be lost. I will tell you that the DAV is very strong and also considers themselves, they really don't want any strings to a particular state. So they prefer to fund at the national level. At one time, we actually did talk about providing some funding to them, and they said, thank you, but no.
So in other words, we have two positions that we run the risk of losing right now, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Well, I guess I'll take that back. I mean, thanks in large part to your efforts, we presently do have funding, state funding that supports both the American Legion, and starting this next biennium will support the VFW. So with that funding, we don't believe we're at risk.
At risk for how long?
Well, sir, I would, Mr. Chairman, I would say that as long as we continue to augment their funding, we should not have an issue with their support.
Okay, Senator Von Flatern has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. So you have 45,000 veterans and you have 22,000 that are in the state that are in the system, in the veteran system, using it at some point or another. What does the disabled or the American Legion or the VFW do for those people?
So, Mr. Chairman, through you to the senator, really that's everything they can do. Everything from the initial claim, which is to sit down with an individual veteran, basically do the same thing that we do with our 8 VSOs, I'll say 8+ VSOs, and actually take the claim. And so process the initial claim. And then they actually serve in Wyoming. One of the 3 DSOs serves as the power of attorney then for the veteran. if the veteran chooses to do that, in which 95 to 99% do. And so then they are their representative in regard to the VA. Excuse me for just a second, I need a shot of water here. So they represent the veteran. And that can be everything from the veteran received. So I will tell you that myself, I filed in September of 17. Sorry, sir. Did you have?
No, go for it.
Oh, okay.
please.
So they represent them in that process. The veteran gets correspondence back. There may be something that needs to be adjusted. They help with that adjustment in the claim. They file some new form or whatever it is, justify something to the Veterans Administration. But then most importantly is if the claim should be denied, then we get into, if the veteran so chooses, they can do an appeal. And in Wyoming, our veteran service officers are not involved in the appeal process, but the DSOs are. So they then can represent the veteran, and using the reach back of their legal teams at the national level, provide support to the veteran to work through the appeal process. Did I answer your question, sir?
Go ahead, Co-Chairman Von Flatern.
I'm trying to figure out, there's 3 versus 22,000 veterans. So are they busy all the time? I mean, way backlogged, or if a veteran has no problems going to the VA and he wouldn't even involve these people, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, through you to the senator, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Detai, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add on just a little bit of further explanation. A little background, when I started my involvement with the Veterans Commission in the early 2000s, the state had 1 veteran service officer, 1 state service officer. We now have 8. The way that we have looked to improve our process over the last 15 years, our state officers are the initial front line for the Wyoming veterans. They're the ones that go out that prepare the initial claim for the veteran. And it has been our goal over these last years to get them all trained up, uniform training, so that when they present the claim from the veteran to the DSO, it is as complete as possible. The DSO then takes it and proceeds to move it through the process through the VA. If anyone, I will say from personal experience, and I'm sure that others out there have this, the VA process is very, very complicated. Veterans need help, they need assistance, and that's kind of the system that we've built. And then once it gets to the VSO, going back 15 years ago, there was a significant backlog when those claims were coming in from service organization service officers at the local level, from the local VFW, sending up claims that were not complete. And we certainly appreciate our partners with the service organizations, but they were resulting in a significant backlog for those 3 DSOs at the VA. So right now, the system that we've got in place, that we've worked to put in place, is to have our state service officers provide those DSOs with claims that are as complete as possible, to streamline the system, to eliminate the backlog. And I think we've been very successful with that in recent years, so that a veteran can go through, get his claim filed, get it as complete as possible, get the benefits that they deserve, and not have to go back and use the DSOs through the appeals process. So I just a little background for the committee's information.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, just hang on a second. Senator Von Flatern.
So the DSO, Mr. Detai, do you know if the DSOs cost the same as a VSO? Are they the same price?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Flatern, I'm going to refer that to Executive Director Shepard.
Mr. Shepard?
Mr. Chairman, to the senator, they are not exactly the same cost. We're not organized exactly the same. The VSOs vary somewhat, but so there's they are not exactly the same.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Co-Chairman.
Could we have the exact cost of, because we are now providing 8 VSOs in the state. And so I don't know that the DSOs need to be funded if we can increase the VSOs by 1, or there 8 of them take the place of the 3 VSOs or DSOs, excuse me. I get my O's and O's mixed up.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond to that?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Colonel. We're all getting a little bit confused because I thought we had 3 of the DSOs. And we
Right, yes, sir. There are 3 DSOs that support the state of Wyoming presently. We have 8 VSOs, the Veteran Service Officers. So the big difference between the VSO and the DSO is the appeals process. Our VSOs don't participate, aren't trained, aren't supported to do the DSO role of appeals. Does that clarify that? Or is it clear as mud at this point,
No, I
Mr.
think
Chairman?
that cleared it up. We just were getting, I think I knew that. But yes, that did clear it up. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if that being the case, Colonel Shepard, on this, if we don't have our veteran service officers, what's prohibiting us, or is there anything prohibiting us from asking our VSOs to become trained, to have our VSOs become the trained person? Then we have 8 of them in our state as opposed to just 3. We're funding our own internal employees as opposed to funding an outside entity for doing this project for us. And on secondary question to that, how time consuming, what type of training do they have to go through?
Go ahead, Colonel.
Mr. Chairman, to the representative, so that's an interesting question. I would argue that from a cost effectiveness standpoint, that is more than a doubling of work to get into the appeals process, especially when you talk about the reach back capability of the legal teams provided at the national level in support of those DSOs. That's just something we really don't have, and we would still have to reach back to someone to give us that support. Now, I will argue on the next slide, or I won't argue, but I'll point out on the next slide, in some states they do that. But I don't think it's nearly as cost effective as the model that we're using.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Detite, did you have something to add?
You know, Mr. Chairman, I would add to, and I would correct me if I'm wrong, Colonel Shepard, Colonel Porter, the service organizations, the VFW, the American Legion, the DAV, also have some sort of a congressional mandate to be the veterans representative to the VA as well. So there is some federal language there that puts the service organizations in that role.
So what you're saying is it's somewhat of a requirement by the federal government.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that I would say requirement, but they do have some sort of congressional language backing them in that role to represent the veteran before the VA.
Okay, I'm looking for any other questions the committee may have. So we're going to change the rules a little bit. You just make sure you interrupt me if I don't see you. The little screen and you're wiggling all over the place. So I think Colonel Shepard, continue on.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to go to the next slide, which again is Veteran Service Organization, Department of Service Officers Support, but it's a table. And that table is reflective of several states that I have reviewed their operations. I guess before I get into the specifics of the table, what I'll tell you is I was pleasantly surprised after doing this review that what I determined was that our return on investment in comparison to all of the states I reviewed is significant. As far as the level of support provided, as Representative Brown pointed out, it is possible for you to train up your VSOs and have them function in that DSO role. That's why I said early on that it's a DSO role, because it can be also applied to the VSO, but at a prohibitive cost, in my opinion, when you compare it to the way that we're doing it with the 8 service officers, and then supporting 2 DSOs with $100,000 each per biennium. In comparison to most states, they have at a minimum some form of a VSO in every county. So for South Dakota, that's 62 VSOs that they support, whether it's through county funding or state funding. Then they additionally have an organization at the state level to further support what they're doing. Now they have I wasn't able to find out what everybody is garnering in VA benefits, but what I did look at was their structure. So comparatively, Wyoming's having 8 VSOs, and I'll call it 8 VSOs plus, because we also have an agreement where we have some other folks in the state that can do some VSO work. And so we take advantage of that, whether it's through the Keeney Foundation or in the southwest corner of the state through Sweetwater County. And we augment that Sweetwater County. But so there's a lot of ways to skin this cat is what I'll come back to. And in none of these cases, whether it be Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, or South Dakota, do they have the same kind of return on investment that we have in Wyoming. And I'm pleased to tell you that I think our construct works and works very well. Are there any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Co-Chairman Von Flatern, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So have you approached any of the foundations to help fund the Department Service Officers? As we get pretty tight on our funding, we may not be able to fund these. So the DSOs, have you looked at other foundations to possibly, like the Keenan or whatever it is out here in Rosette?
Mr. Chairman, to you, to the Senator. Yes, sir, we have looked at that. Unfortunately, everyone seems to be in about the same boat, and I should have said that. I did look at federal options, couldn't find any. I looked at other foundations. None were particularly interested in helping us with either the VSO or DSO function. So again, not trying to grow the program, but support the program as it is. In Wyoming, excuse me, if we were to follow that construct, obviously we'd have 23 VSOs. I don't think that's something we want to consider. I don't think it's something we need to consider. I think that the 8 VSOs are just about right, and with our outreach program works really well.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just kind of want to take another stab at this idea of, having a state employee that we already currently hire. So the 2 people that we're looking at potentially losing, We don't provide state employee benefits to them. They are employees of those particular organizations, right? So that's the first thing. But then second of all, what you're saying is it's not necessarily just the DSO themselves. It's not just that position. It's, I guess the way I'm looking at this is maybe we're paying $100,000 to have an amazing legal team back behind us. We have attorneys on retainer for these veterans, as opposed to just these individual people handling the claims. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, through you to the representative, that is absolutely spot on.
So I guess a question I have is how long is the funding, how long do we have before the funding for these two DSOs expires? And I'm thinking that we're going to ask about a bill to fund those two, to have a discussion concerning that. But when is the expiration date on these two DSOs? I remember we talked about it. Right now it's funded. When does that end?
Hey, Mr. Chairman, General Porter here, if I could, just at the risk of continuing to confuse this a little, you'll recall that this discussion was generated by a letter from Joint Appropriations. This was done last year. The military department went to the committee and went to the legislator and asked for $100,000 for the biennium, or $50,000 per year, to augment or pay half of the DSO for the VFW. So the money is in place and is ready to go, and I think we'll continue to do that. This discussion was in response to, is there a better way to do it, that we reply back to the Joint Appropriations Committee. So we're not asking for anything new. I think we're trying to figure out a way to craft a response to the Joint Appropriations Committee. And the response being that we think this is the most effective, cost-effective way to handle DSOs. As you said, as Representative Brown said, we really, with that $50,000 a year, we're paying half of the DSO's salary to do that, to get an amazing legal team and to get that work done. So that's where Mr. Shepard talks about the return on investment happens to be so significant, because we really get a lot of bang for our buck for that. But again, try not to confuse it more. The funding's in place. We're ready to go. This was really in response to the Joint Appropriations Committee's question of, hey, is there a better way to do that? Over.
So Representative Brown, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, and General and/or Colonel, one of you guys might be able to just answer this. What's the average salary for one of our VSOs right now, is in comparison to what we're spending the $50,000 on, and not paying, fringe benefits on top of that?
General.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to refer to Mr. Shepard on what our VSO makes annually. Do you know, Tim?
Go ahead, Colonel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General. It's about $35,000 a year. I say about because they're all a little different.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that, to me, it seems as if we're paying about the same when you consider fringe benefits and everything else for a VSO as a DSO. It's just the difference is we're getting that retainer attorney on staff that we would not normally have.
Mr. Chairman, yes, Representative Brown, I agree with that. And the experience that they do, I mean, that's all those guys are doing is appealing those claims. So they're very good at it. Over.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you, we do not need a bill to continue the funding. We're in good shape there. Is there direction the committee might go to support the way you're presently doing it, so that funding continues in the next biennium? I don't see anybody's hands raised, and I think we understand what we're doing now. Oops, there we go. Co-Chairman Von Flager, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that we can commit another budget or future legislators to another budget. So if they have it covered in this biennium, we're good to go. And that's as much as we could do.
All right. Well, continue on. I think I'm looking here. I believe General Porter, you might be next.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're going to move to, you'll see a slide that's statutory updates and reports, that's blank. And then following that is the slide that starts statutory updates. And I'm going to introduce Colonel Chris Smith, our state judge advocate, to talk that particular issue. Over.
Welcome, Colonel Smith. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you go to the next slide, well, essentially we have 3 statutory update interim topics. The second and third are somewhat related. But turning to the first one, if you turn to the slide about the state military code, as the committee will no doubt recall, we briefed as part of the discussion on the interim topics this year at this year's session that our state military code, which is 1912-101, is frankly in terrible shape. It hasn't been revised since '99. The UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which it is partially based on, has been revised 3 times substantially. So some of the terminology in the state military code is so out of date that we have found it's of limited value to us. The primary problem we have is almost every state besides Wyoming has an ability to do a court martial, to have basically what is essentially a misconduct trial or a criminal trial, except for Wyoming, because our statute is so out of date, some of the terminology we just can't do. So as you might recall, we committed to revising the statute and getting a draft bill to you. Unfortunately, over the last 2 months, we've been a little sidetracked by the COVID activities, and so we don't currently have a draft bill for you. We anticipate the bill is going to be fairly long. The state military code, when printed out, is over 10 pages long, and we're going to have to touch the majority of the sections to bring it up to date. And in talking with the AG's office and working with them, we've identified some other issues we just haven't had time to resolve. For example, one of the key issues is when you consider having a trial, our current code said it has to be a military judge. Well, a military judge depends on training, depends on certification. Who does that certification? But unfortunately, this is a state court. And so we don't have a certified military judge within Wyoming. We don't have a slot for it in our Army or Air legal offices. And so now we're talking about bringing a judge in from outside the state that is not licensed to practice law in the state. So we have a lot of issues we got to try to resolve. And we started down that road. And like I said, we got fairly sidetracked. If you go on to the next slide, the second slide on the state military code, I'm fairly certain well before the September next joint transportation meeting, we will have a proposed bill before you. We are also trying to make it in such a way that it won't become out of date. So as the UCMJ changes, which it does periodically, we're trying to build into the code the ability for it to change with those changes instead of having so much detail that we lose the ability to use our own state code. So at this point, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for the committee's questions about this process, but I would also, our recommendation is that you allow us to continue to work on coming up with a draft bill for well before the September session, because unfortunately, I think for the members, this is going to be a little more complicated than some of the bills we usually put forth to you. So pending the committee's questions on this particular topic.
Senator Pappas, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Smith, would it be possible to make the statute to, change the statute so it's less prescriptive in the statute? And is it possible to allow the department to do a lot of this stuff through rules and regulations so that they can be more flexible and be able to be changed, easily? Maybe even refer, as you said, to the UCMJ. And as it changes, we don't have to change our statutes. So I think if we can get less prescriptive in our statute, seems logical that we ought to be able to do it through rules and regulations.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, that's exactly what we're trying to do. The current statute actually provides that the department can put out rules and regulations. And in my time, in the last, say, 18 years, we never have had rules because the statute is essentially just broken. There's so much detail in it that we couldn't figure out a way by rulemaking to fix it. So that is exactly what we're trying to do. And one of the things the Attorney General's office is looking into is the dividing line between what has to go in statute and what can go into the rules. So we are definitely going that way. And we hope, I think ultimately we may end up with a statutory scheme that is far simpler than what we currently have.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Follow up. Senator Pappas, go ahead.
Would it be easier just to repeal the entire section and just start from scratch?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, we did look at that. I mean, if you look around the country, I remember looking at the Alabama code as well as the Colorado code, and they totally revised it several years ago. And it is a lengthy, long, cumbersome, in my mind, process. The other problem we have with it, it does give us the ability to do several things in the state military code that we rely on all the time. For example, there's an Article 15, which is a non-judicial administrative process that is allowed under the state military code. We use that monthly. We rely on that. So it isn't quite as simple as just getting rid of the whole code and starting over, because there are parts of it we need in place and we rely on.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to suggest that also. It'd be easier for us in the legislature if it was a completely rewritten code rather than going in and fixing little pieces of it. And I understand you might want to keep some of it in place, but it'd sure be easier to get it through the legislature if you rewrote the entire thing. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, and that was one of our options. And we are certainly willing to hear from the committee your direction in that area.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Smith, as I go through the statute, 1912, 101 through 110, quite small. Can you give us some examples of where you see some issues? Just a few.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings. Yes, ma'am. So one of the primary areas is 1912-105, which talks about prosecutions and appeals. And you can see down in subparagraph C, it talks about a military judge, a qualified military judge, or a county or district court judge to preside over the court martial. It ignores the fact that any military judge we brought in would not be a Wyoming attorney and not licensed to practice in the state. So that was one of our issues. Another issue, I'm trying to hit the big ones. When in 1912-109, No, my mistake. 1912-108, when it talks about confinement in the county jails, in subparagraph B, it talks about confinement for more than a year, but it also talks about confinement in the county jails. And generally, the county jails currently don't want to take, in my discussions with the Laramie County Sheriff, for example, they don't want to take people who are sentenced to more than a year. But it says county jail, so we have to figure out a way that. Many of the UCMJ punitive articles have lengthy jail terms. I don't anticipate that would ever occur, but there's another place in the statute where it talks about, it seems to apply that there's a 1-year cap, and another place in the statute says, as here in 108B, that if it's for more than a year, so it's just, it contradicts itself. When you also look at the appeal process, it's not really well defined. It talks about it going to the Adjutant General, which is not the way we normally do state court appeals. So that's a problem. In 1912-105A and 109E, it talks about the Judge Advocate General, and that is not someone who exists in the Wyoming Military Department. The Judge Advocate General by federal statute is the 3-star head of all JAGs on active duty in the Army, and there's a separate one in the air. So that term no longer applies in our state. And we certainly aren't going to bother the active duty 3-star in DC, who sits over all the active duty JAGs with whether or not we can do a court martial in Wyoming. Those are some of the highlights, Senator Hutchings.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Colonel Smith, just a few you've gone over, and just looking at the statute, seeing it is only a few pages long, it seems that you could go through these few and make all the necessary changes and produce a good product. Or I guess if you really did want, take it all out and reword it. Seems like it's a little bit more difficult, and the changing seems like it's real simple, but I guess that's up to you to decide. But just from the few changes I see, it seems like it could be a very doable project. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I guess I got the impression that it was going to be a substantial project. I'm not sure of that. We do have a recommendation here that we'll get to in a minute. Are there any other questions from the committee? So the recommendation is to request the LSO work with the military to produce a draft bill to fix the state military code problems that we have right now. And I have direction from the LSO that they are willing to help with that. And I guess what we need is if everybody is finished, we need a motion from the floor. Senator Hutchings, go ahead. Oops, well,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move that we allow or ask LSO to help the military department restructure Wyoming Statute 1912-101 through 110 for the military department.
Second.
okay,
Mr. Chairman,
got some questions first. Point of order. Oh, Senator Anderson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, there's more parts of that that's going to be redone.
Correct.
There's 7101, there's 7106. I don't think we should limit it to what sections they're going to redo.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. We can add those other 19.7, 9 accordingly. That's just a motion to just get it started.
Senator Pappas, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think the motion would probably just be the recommendation, request the LSO work with the Wyoming Municipal Park to produce a draft bill revising these statutes for members' consideration well before the joint transportation meeting. And I think that they ought to have the flexibility to think about not only revising the statutes, but starting from scratch.
I'd like to second that motion.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
My
sir.
motion was already seconded.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, we need to dispose with the first motion. If you're going to do motions off the floor for something like this, otherwise, Mr. Chairman, what you could do is you could do very similar to what Chairman Von Flatern did yesterday and just get a room temperature feel. For legislative rules, we do not need a motion and a second and an actual tallied vote to draft legislation. You can just get a room temperature and at the chairman's prerogative, just direct LSO to draft legislation.
I withdraw my motion because I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, well, I'm looking for other hands. If the committee's in agreement with that.
Mr. Chairman, I would just ask for a show of hands to move forward.
Yes, okay, show of hands. Everybody in favor of the LSO working with the military to draft the bill? That looks pretty much unanimous. So that'll be a draft bill that comes to us at our next meeting in, I think in September, or will it be in July?
Mr. Chairman, I think this one would be in September. I think our one in July is a very, very narrowly tailored meeting. I don't believe we would be taking this up in July.
Okay, that'll give you time to get her done, I think. All right, let's continue on. Well, let's see, wait a minute here. What time is it? Let's go ahead and do a little bit more before we take a break, unless somebody's really wanting to take a break. Looks like we're good. Go ahead, General Porter.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on to the next slide that is entitled Statutory Updates to Retention Incentives, Family Member Educational Benefits. And I will preface this with the recommendation, which is that that we don't ask the committee for a bill or anything at this point. And I'll walk you through that. But in the interest of time and that sort of thing, we're going to recommend that we don't address this topic at this time. I tell you what came out of it, though. The issue was all about retention of Army Guard and Air Guard, Wyoming Army Guard and Air Guard folks. And we as I believe I've briefed you all before, strength and attaining over 100% strength is my number one priority in the Wyoming Military Department. It's important for lots of different reasons, more to the point that, you know, we need men and women to fill our ranks in order to execute our missions. Recruiting is going fairly well right now. Even in spite of COVID, the Army and the Air continue to do a great job on the recruiting side of house. What concerns me is the retention of those soldiers and airmen, particularly after the deployments that we've experienced. We tend to, since 9/11, we tend to have significantly higher attrition rates following large deployments. Not because they necessarily had a bad time at the deployment, but many people join to go deploy, and once that's over, they kind of want to move on to do different things. So as we started to take a look at, once we have a third of the Army force and about a quarter of our Air Force deployed this time, we wanted to make sure that we're able to retain those individuals on the backside of the deployment. One of the things we came up with was modeled after what happened in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania passed a law last year that any service member in their National Guard that extended for the max length of 6 years received a full rights scholarship to any university, public university in the state of Pennsylvania. And so that was even given to folks that if, say, a young female just after their first enlistment extended for 6 years, she could give that scholarship to a child that wasn't even born yet. So it was very wide ranging and it had a lot of benefit to it. I talked to the Adjutant General from Pennsylvania and said, hey, how did this come about? And how did you get your state to sort of appropriate that amount of money and where it was going to go? And he said, we didn't appropriate any new money. What we did was there was a scholarship fund in the state of Pennsylvania that existed that wasn't being tapped very well. There was a lot of money left in there. And what we did was we linked those extensions to that scholarship fund. So that led us to think about, well, how could we do something similar here in Wyoming? And the Hathaway Scholarship leaped to mind. And could we do something with Hathaway to guarantee people that extended maybe the highest level of Hathaway? As we started to peel that onion back and looked at the complexities of Hathaway, the purpose for Hathaway, what's going on in the state in terms of revenue right now, really thought that it was a bad time to go in there. Hathaway's probably not the right vehicle to try to utilize, and certainly with what's going on financially within the state, really came to the conclusion that now is not the time to seek that sort of benefit. So to members of the committee, recommend that we don't take this up right now. I will tell you, I'm still concerned with retention. The organization here is probably going to spend the next 2 to 3 months really diving in depth to see what kind of incentives we could implement that could assist with retention, and see if we can do some different things. And I would expect, if the committee would allow me latitude, maybe next interim topic, I will have some different ideas along that line. But at this particular time, I really have a recommendation that we not address that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and first, before we take any more questions, and we do have some questions, and we'll have a little conversation here. I'll back myself up and make sure that we are at a point of order. We had another motion and a second. Are you two senators good with withdrawing that other motion and second?
Yes.
Like they are. So now we are operating at a point of order, I guess. So Representative Newsom and then Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Porter, what is our retention rate compared to other states around us and to the national retention rate? Are we woefully not performing in retention, or are we in line with the rest of the country?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, we're not bad. As I said, it kind of goes in a sine wave depending on deployments. Our on the Army side, retention right now is probably at about 13%, which is really pretty good. The air is a little above that, which again is pretty good. But what we've seen in past deployments is that jumps all the way up to 18, 19% at times. So that's what I was trying to get after. I don't think we're woefully out of line with anybody else. Matter of fact, we're probably a little bit better than a lot of folks. But it was an attempt to try to cut off about 5 to 6% rise that we get after those deployments.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I think I want to compliment the Guard. That 97% and 92% sound like pretty high numbers from what I've been watching. I think you're doing a good job of getting your authorized strength. Am I mistaken about that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, recruiting is starting, like I said, is starting to go well. We're actually on the Army side a little higher than that right now. The air is hanging right around 92%. I will tell you though, compared to, if you look at the coin of the realm, as it were, across National Guard, in terms of which units get modern equipment, i.e. the C-130J, which units get new missions and military construction and those kind of things, all revolve around how well we do strength. And so those states that are successful at that are at 100% or even higher. So that's why my priority continues to reside there. We are doing pretty well on the recruiting side. But in order for us to be effective, I think, and maintain that 102% strength, which is my goal, we're going to have to be able to retain better than we've done in the past. Does that answer your question, sir?
Okay, I'm looking for other hands. I think, yeah, you've answered our questions pretty well, and to do much with your facilities from a state budgetary standpoint, that might not happen for a little while. Anyway, I commend you on what you're doing. I would think that the ability to recruit guardsmen nationwide ought to be really good right now with the unemployment rate that we're looking at.
You know, Mr. Chairman, it's interesting. I was talking to the Adjutant General from Virginia yesterday, and his recruiting operation has dropped out the bottom, he said. The COVID really, for whatever reason, affected some states significantly in their recruiting mission. As a National Guard, I think the month of April, we were short of mission by about 30%. But I will tell you, sir, that's not the case in Wyoming. Both the Army and the Air Guard folks are doing a great job, and they continue to drive on. I think for the very reasons you mentioned of the economy. It's sort of hit and miss around the nation, but Wyoming's doing pretty well right now. Over. Mr. Chairman,
you're on mute.
Yep.
You're still on mute.
Mr. Chairman, you're still on mute. There you go.
There you go. All right. I don't know. There's two screens here and my mouse is in the wrong place. So we're finished with this segment.
We're finished with that one, sir. There's one more left in the statutory updates, number 3, that Colonel Smith is going to talk through, and then we'll be finished with that segment of it, sir.
All right, let's take a quick break, everyone. Be back in 15 minutes. Thank you, sir. I believe it's time to call the meeting to order. So I wanted to have a conversation, I guess, with the public like we would normally have. I welcome anybody who's here at our meeting. It's a strange format, especially for older guys like me. We're going to be in some fairly tedious stuff, but in a short while, we'll have an update on our new skilled nursing center that I think the public would be very interested to listen to. And from there, I think we'll move on to our next slide. General Porter.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to turn this over to Colonel Smith. For everybody, we're on statutory updates number 3, retention incentives, out-of-state Guard member benefits. Colonel Smith, I give it to you.
Thank you, General Porter, Mr. Chairman. So again, we already talked the incentive issue. One of the things we also looked at was whether some of the current Wyoming Guard member benefits could apply to our out-of-state members. The Wyoming legislature over the years has been extraordinarily generous in the benefits given to Wyoming Guard members. The Wyoming Military Service Relief Act 1911-101 in its following provisions is really very broad, and certainly Wyoming leads the country, in my opinion, with Guard member benefits. Of course, one of the problems with Guard member benefits as a state statute is it really only applies to Wyoming residents and to some extent to folks who work in Wyoming. The Wyoming National Guard pulls people from as many as 20 other states, particularly in the Air Guard, where we pull a number of C-130 oriented people. We also have approximately, and I couldn't get a current number, we haven't done our survey yet this year, approximately as high as 40% of our current Guard membership comes from other states. Obviously, the majority coming from Colorado, since the Air Guard is only in Cheyenne, but we also pull them from all the surrounding states. And one of the things we looked at, we've heard stories over the years of some of our Wyoming Guard members who are in particular residents of Colorado, have not been able to take advantage of some of the existing Wyoming-centric rules and policies out there. So we were looking at what could the legislature do, again, to try to keep people, particularly those out of state. So if you turn to the second slide, one of the things we discovered is a couple of situations where a preference for Wyoming residents is given that has impacted our non-resident Wyoming National Guard members. When we look at the Wyoming National Guard, we respond to floods, fires on behalf of the state, and are at the call of the governor. We all take an oath to obey the orders of the governor and his calls on our time. And one of the concerns we had is certain of these preferences only apply to Wyoming residents. And yet Wyoming National Guard members do quite a bit for the state of Wyoming that could be identified or recognized, perhaps a better word. And so, as you'll see on this second slide, we did discover in certain state government and particularly higher educational institutions, there are some preferences given to Wyoming residents as they're trying to fill out their programs. We offered as a way to help with retention and really recognize the service that our out-of-state Guard members of the Wyoming National Guard give to the state, that any existing preference could be given also to out-of-state Guard members for those programs. One of the examples, there are two actually locally that I know about since I live in Cheyenne. At Laramie County Community College, they have a couple of excellent programs. One is dental assistance and the other is sonograms. And both of them have a preference for Wyoming residents when they're looking. They always have more applicants than spaces, and they have a Wyoming preference. So what we offered here in our recommendation looking at this was in recognition for the service of our Wyoming National Guard members give to the state, even if they're from out of state, would be an existing preference already out there would include a current Wyoming National Guard member, even if they don't reside in the state. Obviously only for the program within the state. The intent is, again, not to create a new preference, but merely to extend an existing preference for Wyoming residents to Wyoming National Guard members. There would be no additional cost directly. I mean, obviously, we were looking at this as a preference. It's not a tuition thing. So if they give a preference letting somebody enter the program, they would still pay out-of-state tuition, for example. But again, no cost, no additional cost was the theory. And it was just to, if somebody gives a preference, it would extend to Wyoming National Guard members. That's the concept. So we would recommend that the committee ask the LSO to draft a bill to add this kind of preference extension to Wyoming National Guard members. And with that, I'll stand for the committee's questions.
Yeah, Chairman Von Vleteren, go ahead.
Thank you. Colonel Smith, is this supposed to be 102 or, because 101 in my book is repealed. So is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Vleteren, my mistake. It's really a 101 in all the following sections. Okay. It is the Wyoming Military Service Relief Act. My mistake. I should have extended the entirety of the subsections.
Thank you.
Senator Pappas?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really in favor of this change to a statute and this ability to be able to enhance our recruiting. As a former assistant adjutant general for air, I know how difficult it is for especially the air to keep their numbers up and their manning up. And I really think that this is number one. It really incentivizes those folks that do come to Wyoming and work for our state. But it also helps us out in keeping our retention numbers up. So with that, I would move that we do that.
Well, hang on just for a second on the motion. Well, I guess we could make that motion if there's a second, and then we've got other hands up, so more questions are ahead of us. Is there a
Second, Mr. Chairman.
seconded by Senator Anderson, moved by Pappas, that we extend that, create a preference extension and draft a bill. Now we'll go into discussion. There are some hands raised. I'm going to keep Colonel Smith. You will be able to answer some questions. Representative Crank, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question will be, this is limited to individuals and doesn't pass on to like children or entities owned by the guardsmen, such as businesses.
Go ahead, Colonel.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crank, after we drafted the slide, I did have the thought that we have a statutory provision for Wyoming businesses and state contracting, for example. And this, our intent was current National Guard members in their individual capacity, and we could certainly make sure the bill specifies that directly. So it wouldn't be LLCs, it wouldn't be corporations, it would only be individuals.
Thank you.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like the idea of the state government or higher education institutions, but I have a little heartburn with mandating businesses adjust their hiring practices. I can't kind of get my head around the mandating a business to adjust their hiring practices in the statute. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Representative Newsom, I understand that when we drafted the potential language, we were kind of just for discussion purposes. Many businesses already have veterans preferences that already apply and would apply to current National Guard members in the way that they're operated. I know Union Pacific has a very broad application of what they consider a veteran. So I am not aware of any particular situation where a business would give a preference because it's only allowed legally in certain areas, such as with veterans. So we can certainly work with LSO over the legal niceties of that, but thinking about it further based on your question in particular, I'm not sure the business part really applies.
Co-Chairman Von Flatern, go ahead.
Thank you. Colonel Smith, don't we have some preferences to give to families? And so piling on Representative Crank's thought was the families don't need to be considered in this. You're only doing the National Guard member himself.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Flatern, the idea was, again, there are some family preferences that apply within the state of Wyoming. That is certainly true. Again, we were looking at our out-of-state members of the Wyoming National Guard and trying to add an additional recruiting and retention benefit to them with no cost to the state, essentially. And that was what this idea came from.
I don't know if I'm missing No, they're Representative Blake. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Smith and General Porter, that I'm in favor of this, but every year it seems to get tougher and tougher in the House to get these passed. And I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Co-Chairman Van Flatern.
So Colonel Smith, you do want the preferences given to the University of Wyoming or something where the family is involved, or you just want it for the member?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Van Flatern, the original concept was for the member to really recognize their service to the state, even if when they lived out of state. Certainly, if the committee desires to extend it to family members of current National Guard members, I'm not sure we would object to that. Given Representative Blake's comment, which we're we're well aware of some of our challenges in the past years in the House in particular, we were looking at something, we wanted to take a step, not a leap. So we limited it to current National Guard members from out of state.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Colonel Smith and with Representative Blake. I would not want to extend this to the, I mean, would like to extend it to the family, but I don't think it would be, it would behoove us. We would probably lose the bill if we made it too broad to include families and family members. That would be an additional cost to a lot of our institutions and businesses. But I think that extending it to the member only is probably prudent now. It always could be extended in the future. But I think in order for us to make it palatable to those who will be voting on it in the next session, I think we need to keep it limited. Mr. Chairman, you're on mute.
I'm pushing all the wrong buttons. Most people, when I'm around these computers, they say, now don't touch anything more. So I guess a question I'd have is how many out-of-state guardsmen do we have? And what kind of effect it might have. I can see why there might be some resistance. I'm not sure there will be as much as we think.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I tried to dig up the old numbers. We do a survey sort of annually. We apparently didn't do one in 2019, where we basically just collate the data for the residency of our existing National Guard members. The number that sticks in my mind was something over 700 of our nearly 3,000 members. But I've also heard the number about 40%. It's higher in the Air Guard because we pull from more states because of our specialized C-130 experience that we want. It's lower in the Army Guard, tends to be more community-based over historically. So we do pull people from, certainly from Utah at the Afton Armory units. The Sheridan in Lovell area pulls from Montana. Wheatland and Guernsey pull from Nebraska. I personally know people from probably 20 different states in the Air Guard.
Okay, before we get a feel for how the committee wants to go with this, if we want to go forward with it, could you probably give us an idea of what that an overview of how the bill would read?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I mean, as is on the second slide of number 3 down in the middle, I just took a shot at the dark, didn't talk to my LSO compatriots about it. And we had said if any business, state governmental entity, or higher educational institute of the state, if they give a preference to Wyoming residents, they shall extend the same preference to any current Wyoming National Guard member, regardless of their state of residence, unless prohibited by law. We've already discussed the business part, probably can drop out. We probably want to make it clear it's an individual benefit and not an LLC, S corporation, or corporation owned by such a member. And we probably also want to say something that it doesn't affect the tuition paid by the member. It only is entry into such a program, only those preferences.
Senator Hutchings, did you have a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Colonel Smith, what I'm reading is that this is just going to be a preference. So if someone from out of state wanted to go to LCCC and participate in the program, let's just say there are 5 people on the list, that out-of-state National or Wyoming National Guard member would be placed closer to the top for a preference because they're in the Wyoming National Guard to the other 4 people. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings, that is certainly our intent. It really just gets them a foot in the door for consideration. Obviously, they would still have to meet GPA requirements, undergraduate or previous educational experience in that setting. And so we would have to word it carefully to make sure, and it doesn't create a preference in the sense that it's only if the program already has that preference. So my language is pretty simplistic, and I'm sure the bill would be a little more complicated.
So I don't see any more hands. I think the committee's ready to vote on whether to draft a bill or not. All those in favor, raise your hand. This is, let me go through this again. 11. So I think I have 11. Representative Brown, you're not on there right now. I don't know if you're still in the meeting, or anyway, I can't see you. So I believe
Chairman, my hand was raised, but you couldn't see it.
Okay, well then we have 12. So don't mess with me.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Those opposed, well, we're going to go ahead and draft a bill. There's enough. The committee is in favor of that. So let's go ahead and move on. Whoever's in charge of the next.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Obermuller, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one follow-up. It's kind of my understanding that it'll be drafted without the word business in there. Is that a correct assumption?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, I don't have any problem with that because like we talked about, I'm well aware of the inability for businesses to discriminate, so to speak, based on status, except in certain legally allowed areas. So I had put business in there, but in further thought, I'm not sure it's legal, and I also don't know how that would ever apply. So as far as I'm concerned, I'll commit to you in the committee that it will not apply to business, won't be part of the bill as drafted.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Next, our next slide is blank, reports to the committee. So I'm not sure.
Can I just add something?
Yes.
Did,
Sure, go ahead.
what I did see was that you said tuition relief would not be given to the member. You were just talking about a preference. So I think that needs to be included in the bill, Colonel Smith.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Flater, of course, I'll make a note of that.
Okay.
now ready to move on. Is committee finished? Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, we'll continue to move on. You'll see the blank slide to reports to committee, and we'll begin with our first report being the update on skilled nursing. And I'll turn that over to Chairman Detai and Mr. Shepherd.
Go ahead when you're ready, gentlemen.
Mr. Chairman, I had a little trouble with the unmute button. You wouldn't know anything about that, but I've gotten there. So on that first slide talks about update on the skilled nursing facility. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I would like to talk about the level 1-2 study for the veterans home first, if that's okay. And if
go ahead.
Great. And the next slide is the Wyoming Veterans Home level 1-2 study. And at this point, I'd also like to introduce Ryan Scranton and Franz Fuchs, who are our technical experts on this today. And you know, I think a good leader always tries to be followed by very, very intelligent, bright young men, and these two are that. So great to have them with us. And if you ask me something I can't answer, I'm hoping they will.
Thank you, Colonel. I guess I would add, okay. I believe we have Travis Detai. Are you on right now? I saw you in the waiting room. Yep, there you are. Okay.
He is there as again as Darth
Yes,
Vader
Mr.
for some
Chairman,
reason.
I'm back.
Continue on.
Okay, so the level 1-2 study, really we've been doing that in conjunction with the development of the skilled nursing facility. I will tell you that a little background. I came into this project last fall, came in here from a long time on the federal side, worked a great deal with acquisitions. And one of the things that I learned in the acquisition business is that what you must do first is form a very, very strong, complete, talented team. And I will tell you that coming in on the state side and stepping into this group or team was an absolute delight. The right areas are represented, and from the owners of the facilities, the operators of the facilities, to the architects, to the engineers. It's just a really well-rounded team, and Franz and Ryan have been a big part of that. So I will tell you that the level 1, level 2 is on track. At the present time, we haven't uncovered any insurmountable obstacles. There has been a lot of progress made in what we think that veterans home should look like as a result of the level 1, level 2, with the bottom line being that we expect to, now that the skilled nursing facility is out for bid, that we can turn our attentions to the level 1, level 2 and finish that up for the veterans home. And we fully expect to have that done by the 1st of July and be able to report out. Are there any questions on the level 1, level 2 study?
Committee, any questions? Not seeing any, I guess continue.
Great, thank you. I would turn to the next slide, which is our timeline, the Veteran Skilled Nursing Facility timeline. And again, we have nothing but great news there. One of the keys on there, you'll notice in green, is the notification of funds offer was accepted on the 22nd of April or received on the 22nd of April from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That allowed us to move forward with the project. And it is now out for bid, with the bid closing on the 10th of June. With the expectation that we'll commence construction on or about the 15th of August, with substantial completion in the spring of 22. Are there any questions on the timeline?
Yes, spring of 22, is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Crank, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shepherd, I'm just a little confused, and this may be water under the bridge already, but in the slide above, you're talking level 1, level 2 study, July 1 of 2020, and then down in the timeline, where does that fit? Because I see level 3 study complete like in just before April, so I'm not sure. I'm just a little confused on what's going on with the time.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Representative Crank. Sir, those are actually two separate initiatives. The level 1, level 2 study is on the veterans home, the current facility in Buffalo, and the level 3 was on the skilled nursing facility, the addition to the complex there in Buffalo.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I guess, oh, Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shepherd, so bids are open at this time. They're open now. And when will those bids be confirmed or given out?
Colonel.
Mr. Chairman, to you, Representative Blake, the bids went out on May 14th and they close on June 10th.
Okay, any other questions, committee?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
One of the issues that we had with the Buffalo location was the water line wasn't big enough. And I was thinking we might hear something about that. The estimation was that the water line was going to have to be a lot larger than what services the facility now, and they'd probably have to just put in a new water line. Has anything been accomplished with that yet?
Go ahead, Colonel.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Scranton to address that. He's got the particulars on the water system.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Senator Anderson. Good morning, Ryan Scranton, State Construction Department. The water line issue is not an issue of the state's water line being undersized or inadequate. It was an issue with the distribution line being one, undersized, as well as aging and in need of repair. And that's where the concern came. There are several water lines that run parallel to the site, and we are connected currently to two, an 8-inch and a 10-inch. The concern there is the 8-inch line is old, aging, and needs repaired. So we really needed to get on to the another 18-inch line. We've entered into an agreement with Johnson County in the city of Buffalo to install a tapping sleeve on that 18-inch line and have another redundancy there.
Representative Obermuller. Am I
Thank
on?
you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shepherd, on the timeline in July, well, you have the June 1 to June 30 contract negotiation. Can you just flesh that out a little bit? What's anticipated there? Who's negotiating with who in that? timeline? And what are they negotiating about?
Mr. Chairman, I would again like to defer to Ryan on that one. He's got the particulars on the actual bid and those dates associated with that.
Go ahead, Mr. Scranton.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermueller, the term contract negotiation is probably a blanket term for all the actions that take place post bid opening. It's a period where we, the state, are making sure that the bids have come in within budget. We'll be looking at all the bid alternates to decide which ones we want to move forward with. It's a time where the successful contractor will be gathering paperwork for the state to submit insurance, bond, schedules, stuff like that. So it's really just a negotiation between state and contractor where everybody's kind of getting their paperwork together prior to the notice to proceed.
A follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Ryan. So the VA, are they part of that negotiation, or is this? I'm still trying to figure out who the players are, I guess, in that process.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermueller, during that time, after the bid opening, we will have requirements to submit to the VA, primarily updated budget justifications, squaring up our numbers that have come in with the bids to what we have submitted already in the initial grant application. We will be submitting a kind of a federal background check on the successful contractor. And those are all requirements of the VA for the grant. And so that is really where the VA is involved with the negotiation period. They have said the money is there. We still need to meet all of the requirements.
You're good? Okay, Representative. Any other questions? Okay, so I guess continue on.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you'll turn to the next slide, you'll see an actual rendering of what we believe the finished, what one of the 3 cottages will look like. And I would entertain any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson, Senator, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, one of the problems that was identified with the Buffalo location was they didn't have medical staff to handle these more complex patients. What has been done to beef up the medical staff and the nursing staff to operate this facility?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I would ask Mr. Fuchs to address that.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Franz Fuchs. I'm a policy analyst with the Wyoming Department of Health. Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, to answer your question, so this will be a skilled nursing facility environment. The Department of Health, as part of that staffing plan, will hire the CNAs and nurse staff required to care for this population. And just as by way of comparison, we currently operate a skilled nursing facility in Basin, Wyoming, the Wyoming Retirement Center, being able to meet the needs of those patients. That's a similar level of care, and I would say Basin is probably even further from advanced medical care than Buffalo is. So there's kind of two aspects to it. One is the direct care side, and that can be handled through the staffing model. And the second is looking at access to hospital and advanced medical services that I believe, we sort of, when we provided the overview of the 3 sites, Buffalo was a little lower on that ranking than the other 3, but we certainly believe it'll still be adequate, given that we already operate a nursing home, probably even in a more remote location than Buffalo.
Yes, go ahead, Co-Chairman.
So, Mr. Shepherd, will this will these cottages face the mountains?
Mr. Chairman, we have shifted this around. They don't specifically face the mountains. It's more of a southeastern exposure. And, but I don't think that, I'm gonna ask Ryan to step in there. I don't think that any of the cottages specifically face the mountains.
Mr. Scranton, go ahead.
Mr. Co-Chairman, they do not face west towards the Bighorn Mountains. They are situated in the southeast quadrant of the Veterans Home campus and do have a southeast facing view.
Oh, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just make a comment. This last line of questioning has been very disappointing to me. When the decision was being made, the representations were that the water will not be a problem, that Johnson County will be taking care of the water problem. When we toured the facility, in the current facility, they're bringing in nurses and paying them day rate because they don't have enough people there in Buffalo to staff the current facility. So Johnson County said, oh, don't worry about that. We're going to have training programs and recruiting programs. And when this opens, we're going to be ready to hit the ground running, and we're going to have all kinds of people. And, these cottages are going to be facing the mountains, and they're going to have beautiful views. And it seems like a lot of the representations that were made to the entire body now are maybe not so bright. So I guess my last question would be, are any of the contractors that are finalists for this, are they Wyoming contractors? So that would be the one question I'd like to have addressed. Wyoming contractors. Thank you.
I think go ahead and answer. Go ahead and reply to that, and then we'll have another question or so.
All right, sir. Mr. Chairman, again, I would ask Mr. Scranton to discuss the contracting process and the identification of potential contractors.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, in regards to the successful contractor and where they may reside, the bids are open to all contractors, resident and non, and due to the fact that this is federally funded or partially federally funded, we cannot restrict the bids to only Wyoming residents.
So committee, we've run into this before where you'd like to give a preference to contractors on highways and whatnot. If there's $1 of federal funds going into any project, it opens it up to the world. So Senator Hutchins, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a comment. I do believe while we were there touring the complex, we were out in a field where we were assuming would be the direction of the cottages, and it was very, very hot. And I do recall at another meeting, we were told the direction of the cottages was changed, the facing direction, because of the intensity of the heat. and how the heat would really warm up the cottages. Is that true, Mr. Shepherd? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to defer to Mr. Scranton, and I apologize for that, but I don't have that historical perspective or knowledge of how the decision was made to go to the southeast. It's been in the southeast as long as I've been involved with the project. But Mr. Scranton, I would ask you if you can give some background on that.
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings, I would like to refer back to the level 1 and 2 study, which presented the first look at where a potential location for the buildings may be. And that was on the southeast side of the campus, on the east side of the highway, in a field. After contracting with the architect responsible for the level 3 design, their initial idea was, hey, we could put these over here on the west side of the road and give a nice view of the mountains. After further analysis of the site and looking at how the new cottages interact with the existing veterans home, it was identified that really down here in the southeast corner is the best place for the cottages. It provides a centroid for the campus and kind of keeps a community where somebody is not off in the North 40. In regards to the heat, when we were out there standing in the field, it was very hot, and it was mentioned that this is a concern. Can this be addressed? And I did mention that to the architects and the engineers. After that, the cottages did go back to the southeast corner, and it wasn't because of the heat issue. It was really because the cottages fit in the campus best where they are situated, taking into account the community aspect as well as the existing utilities.
Representative Obermuller, I'm sorry to miss you, but go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take responsibility for that day we were standing out in the heat and cooking, and I did bring this to Ryan's attention that afternoon, because I know from personal experience in that area, my folks had a west-facing house, and it was all a beautiful idea, except the convection of heat into the house was a real problem, and I didn't want our veterans to be cooked by that sun. A beautiful view of the mountain is nice, but dealing with the heat was, in my mind, a real issue, and I'm the one who kind of drove that. So I'm sorry to hear that that was not part of the decision making to move it. I thought I had really had a major influence here, but apparently wasn't an issue. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As time goes on, we find out that we aren't all that important. I guess the public will know this idea of a skilled nursing center has been kicked around for now, I think, decades, and we're finally getting it done. We did quite a bit of committee work. We'll be in a cottage setting where there are, I think, 12 residents within a cottage, and I believe is it 3 cottages or 4 cottages? 3 cottages, and it will be adjacent to the grounds where our soldiers and sailors home is in Buffalo. And it wasn't with I think just a lot of disagreement on where the location should be because of the concerns we had with being able to staff, get medical staff and some other things. I think I'm going to chime in on the heat deal. I am convinced that we will have adequate air conditioning to address that, and I'm guessing that's why they turned it that way. I'm probably speaking for the engineers, but I'm sure they have factored that in. Representing Blake, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was super excited that this is going forward. I've been on the committee a long time, and we've been looking at this a long time. I just wondered if we could get a maybe a one-page map of where the final location is being sent to the committee. And then also, Mr. Chairman, I see they're having a groundbreaking in August or September. We're meeting in Casper, September 21st and 22nd. It'd be nice if the groundbreaking was maybe the 23rd or something where we could drive from Casper on up to Buffalo to participate. Just food for thought, Mr. Shepherd.
Okay. So any more to be added, gentlemen? So I think we're done with that report. You know, the wheels of government move like molasses. It's just really slow. You're telling me 2022, and I'm thinking, goodness, if I had to get a barn up in that length of time to house my cattle, they'd all be dead. Anyway, I am glad that this is happening, and let's move on, I guess, to the Cowboy Challenge Academy.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I think before I introduce General Alkire and talk the issue, I did want to kind of frame it. The state has, very prescriptive manners of how we go relocate anything. And so what the intent to brief the committee here was really to get your advice and input. The committee has been a great mentor to previous adjutants general and the military department in the past, and really wanted to take advantage of your experience and also the ability to kind of look outside of the way we view a problem here, potentially in the military. So we're going to describe, or General Alkire is going to describe a problem to you, but we're really not asking anything in the form of a bill or anything else, other than your input and guidance and advice on things maybe we have not considered, or we should consider more, or that's a little bit different perhaps than maybe we view the problem as we go forward, if that makes sense. So I wanted to preface that with that discussion of really looking for some input on how we go forward. I also wanted to mention too, Representative Laux asked me in the interim when we first did this topic, if we were intending to do the level 1 and level 2 study. At the time, I had intended it to be a level 1 study inside the military department in order to save costs to get that done. Since that time, given the sort of, I think the potential of this move and how it could affect, I really, and the fact that now I know that there's a pretty prescriptive process on how we do this, it probably would be, we would have somebody else take a look at the level 1 and level 2 to sort of remove all doubts of how the military looks at it, or that this is a military only solution to the problem. So Representative Laux, I apologize. I mean, that had been my intent at that time. Certainly if the committee advises different, we could take a look at it, but that's the intent now, is to go to the SBC just like we do any other level 1 and level 2 study, and ask for their ability to fund that as we go forward. So if there aren't any questions on that introduction, I will turn it over to General Alkire and have him sort of give you the presentation. Over.
Mr. Chairman, members of, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Hey, members of the committee, good morning. As General Porter prefaced, really we're looking for input and guidance on this potential move. And so let me first start by walking you through some of the history of Youth Challenge. In 2005, it was approved and established to come to Wyoming. At that time, it was decided that Camp Guernsey would be the location, and it's stayed there for the past 15 years. The first class started in January of 2006, and they had 52 applicants. In 2019, June of last year, we had 111 applicants. So the program has grown over the course of the past 15 years. What's remained consistent is a high employee turnover rate. Now, the data that we have goes back to 2013. But let me describe to you what the staff looks like. We have 45 authorizations. Of those 45, 18 are cadet team leaders. Cadet team leaders, there's 18 of them. And what they do is they're with the cadets 24/7. They're with them on Labor Day, Thanksgiving, and they're with them on Memorial Day. They're with them on the holidays while the class is in session. They have 4 bosses. They're called cadet first, category first sergeants. There's 4 of those in there. They're supervisors. So of the 48 personnel that we have, 22 deal with the cadets on a 24/7 basis. From 2013 through last year, we've had 60% turnover in those cadet team leaders and just under 40%, right at about a little over 39% in the category first sergeants. If I can direct you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, to the next slide. This talks about the turnover rate from May of 2019 through where we're at right now. A caseworker, we've lost 1. And I won't just read all these 3, but through these for you. But as you can see, we've had a 53% turnover in the past year, 24 of those 45 positions. Of those 24 positions that have turned over, 16 have been those cadet team leaders, and 1 has been a category first sergeant. I'll take you back to the previous slide. So as you can see, for the past year, we've had 89% turnover. 16 of 18 of those cadet team leaders have rotated. Now, we've tried to address this internally, and with the help of ANI and our human resources department, we were able to give those cadet team leaders and those category first sergeants a $2 an hour raise beginning in January. A cadet team leader prior to January started off making just a little over $17 an hour. With that $2 an hour raise, 19 and change. First sergeant started off making 19 and now they're making $21 an hour. So as of last week, we were 18 of 18 of cadet team leaders, and that is a good news story. What's interesting is 12 of those 18 were hired from March through May of 2020. So as many of you know, money is only part of the reason people stay doing what they're doing. And so we recognize that that's really a short-term solution, a long-term Band-Aid, if you will. Knowing that history of high employee turnover, General Porter and previous to him, General Reiner, have all taken different measures to reduce that turnover rate internally. We've had 4 directors since 2013. We've had multiple deputy directors and commandants. Right now, as General Porter said a couple hours ago at the beginning of this session, we're going to have a ribbon cutting at a new regional training institute there on Camp Guernsey. That old building, we're going to share it with the Air Force. Youth Challenge will. So we've created more office space, more workspace, more space for those cadets. They're still utilizing the same building that they were 14 years ago, but we're really almost doubling the number of applicants. From 2012 to 2017, we ran 4 classes a year. A couple of years ago, we switched back to 2 classes a year. That 4-class model was tough because you can see how that just created more difficulty. With the 60% turnover, 4 classes a year, it was difficult to give people vacation time or to retrain folks. And as I lastly mentioned, we gave those folks a raise, and it has shown a temporary improvement in the stability of that category. So now we decided to look at external factors. The internal factors aren't stabilizing those CTLs. So General Porter and I sat down and the staff and looked at what are some external factors that could help. Maybe a larger workforce would help with that problem. And so that's really one of the driving factors of moving youth challenge is stabilizing the workforce. We think there will be other inherent benefits, enhanced visibility, potential more recruiting opportunities. And of course, we think with a larger school district and larger and different opportunities, there's a potential there for some different partnerships. We recognize this is a probably 36 to 48 month project, but we don't see that the number of applicants going down for youth challenge. In 14 years, we've doubled that. Our target is 100 graduates a year. And so we do need some more space, but really prior to that, we need to stabilize our workforce. In particular, those cadet team leaders and those first sergeants who are with those cadets 24/7 and have a great impact on those cadets. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any questions that you or the committee may have. Thank you.
Committee. Questions? Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chair.
So General, is it Alkire?
Alkire, sir.
Alkire, sorry about that.
That's all right, sir.
Have you talked to any of the K-12 system here? Because some of them have reduced the size of their buildings or given up a building or two. That would help on the cost of moving you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Flattern, that would really be the best solution. If we could find a school that has been vacated, an elementary school that already has classrooms, already has the structure of a school, really it would reduce the cost. We would need probably some additional shower space and those types of things to create some housing facilities, but that would be the best solution, sir.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious as to, this is a tough job. I've known some folks that have worked up at Guernsey on this particular project, and so I'm not probably convinced that moving to a broader pool of workforce would necessarily solve your problems, just because sometimes you have more allegiance from a smaller community where the jobs are essential to them. And I've known quite a few folks who have worked up there, and it is a taxing job. It's similar to working at St. Joseph's Children's Home, and it takes a lot out of an individual to do that. So I guess, how do you evaluate that? Just the fact that there will probably likely be burnout regardless of where you're located. How do you evaluate that as far as your scope of what you're looking at? And then also, as far as the facilities at Camp Guernsey, is there no opportunity there for you to get more of what you need without moving on? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, let me first address that first question in terms of how we evaluate the workforce and the burnout rate. Really, what we're looking at right now is just sheer density. There are other factors, obviously, that will drive where we put youth challenge and why people stay or don't stay. And I think that's probably why we need that level 1 study. That level of analysis has not been conducted, ma'am. With regards to Camp Guernsey, there is space to grow, but there's a competing interest there. It was built to be a military facility, and right now there is increased training going on just outside of the Wyoming Military Department. All 4 branches, including the Navy, utilize Camp Guernsey, and so there's a competing interest there between growing Camp Guernsey and its military capability and growing youth challenge within the same land. So there's a competing interest there that we have to address, ma'am. Did that answer your question?
Representative.
Thanks, ma'am.
I'll get to all your questions. Go ahead, Representative Newsom, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I have is the people that leave, are they staying in the community or are they going to other communities or do you even know that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, I really can't answer that. I just don't know.
Okay. Co-Chairman Von Flatern.
It seemed to me the original curriculum had the students going out to work for part of the day or for some part of the week. And that didn't happen. And they were going to be there for 2 semesters or for 2 semesters each. So they'd be there 6 months basically, where they have 3 or 4 weeks in between the one group leaving and one group coming. All this has changed, of course. Like the skilled nursing facility became a big town, little, or big city, little town kind of argument on the floor. Do you need our input to move the Challenge Academy? Do you need a vote of the people or a vote of the legislature to move the Challenge Academy?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Flatern, I'm not a subject matter expert on how the political system works. Really, for this particular meeting, I'm just looking for gaps and things that we haven't thought about right now, sir.
Okay, thank you.
General Porter, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and to Senator Von Flatern, I don't think that we do need the committee to make a call on that as we go forward. As I said, as we thought this through, it just makes sense though to get your input and your thoughts on it, because at some point, I mean, it affects constituents' lives, as Senator Steinmetz points out. So really, we're just trying to get to the best solution that we can, and your ability to help us shape that and ask the right questions is really what we're seeking. Over.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I look at this, one of the things that I'm looking at in the materials here is kind of the pay grades, and kind of goes back to statements yesterday and talking about what we can do for our state employees and how we can help our state employees. And I think one of the areas that may be of consideration for you guys to look at is locality pay. If you are not able to not able to move, or you don't find it to be beneficial to move, I tend to agree with Senator Steinmetz that this particular style of job is different than just a typical school teacher and or a typical school nurse, any of those types of issues. And so when you start thinking about that, I think it's gonna be harder to put that in Cheyenne or in Laramie or wherever you're thinking of looking at that. So if you take that out of the equation and you start looking at, well, if we keep it here, what do we do? One of the things that I think you could look at is a locality pay increase. Maybe try to attract people to that location, with a higher pay rate, and you're getting paid a locality interest. I know that WYDOT at one point did do that as well for certain locations across the state. I don't know. I think you guys already provide to some level of housing accommodations, stuff like that as well, I believe, but maybe I'm wrong there. But just something to think about there is some sort of a stipend that you might be able to provide the people that are staying there in Guernsey or commuting to Guernsey.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown. Hey, thanks. We'll certainly look at that. And no, we don't provide any housing or accommodations for the staff. What they do get is when those CTLs and first sergeants, when they eat with the cadets, that meal is compensated. They don't have to buy the meal that they eat with the cadets at the dining facility.
Have there been plenty of facilities for people moving in that are part of the staff for the Challenge Academy?
Mr. Chairman, are you asking if there's been a housing shortage for the staff?
Is there plenty of housing for them to come in to where they don't have to travel 100 miles to work?
Mr. Chairman, most of the employees live in Platte and Goshen County. And so there has not been, for Guernsey in particular, yes, but not in those 2 supporting counties.
Okay. Representative Laux.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. This is a little bit off the subject, not having to do with the possible relocation, or they're asking for our recommendations or input for before they look for a level 1 or 2 study concerning this. But I'm really, and I've asked this before, I really would like to know more about the outcomes of the program. We've talked over the years about where are these kids 1 year after they graduate, 2 years, 5 years. I mentored or tried to mentor 2 of those kids in the last couple of years, and it didn't work out. They one of them bailed, and one of them wouldn't get back to me after he was out of the program. But just what is their success rate? What are these kids doing 2 years and 5 years out is what, to me, is something I really want to know before we go on with other things. Can anybody provide that information? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Laux, I can't tell you where they are 1 year after they complete the program. As you know, it's a 23-week residential program with a 1-year mentorship program. Of those who are in the 23-week program, 80% graduate with their high school equivalency or their GED, and then the other portion graduate with credit recovery. After that, they go to a 1-year mentorship program. And I tell you, it's a struggle to find mentors. You know, right now, as part of the application process, cadets are encouraged and family members are encouraged to have a mentor already identified. That doesn't always happen, and we don't punish them. We don't accept folks for not bringing a mentor. But after they graduate and plus 12 months, we really try to track them. After that, sir, we just don't. You know, our goal is to put them back into communities, but there's just not a tracking mechanism that we have right now past 365 days after graduation, sir. And certainly, I don't know if high schools have the same, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Altar. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Laux, I don't know if high schools have that either, but if a high school has a mechanism to track kids past graduation, certainly welcome to, I'd love to implement that. I would welcome that idea, sir.
I'm going to go with General Porter. Go ahead and jump in now.
Yeah, Representative Laux, you know, we've had this discussion before, and we haven't moved it any further. It would be of paramount importance nationally for all of our programs to really effectively describe return on investment for this program. And as General Alcar just mentioned, we have not figured out how to do it. We have pursued looking at you know, criminal databases to make sure that our folks don't get back on that side, but we have not found any way to successfully track our folks and what happens to them after they leave the program. All the information that we have has been anecdotal, and I know that it's frustrating, and but even nationally, we have not figured out a good way to keep track of them once they leave for this. And it would be absolutely, you know, good information to have as you weigh the different priorities that you have to you know, as your funding priorities as this goes forward. As General Alcar said, we'd be, you know, interested in any ideas that you have, but I tell you, it is something that we have looked at very carefully, and we have not come up with an effective answer for you, sir.
Okay, Senator Anderson, I know I'll get to everybody.
Mr. Chairman, they would like to have our input. One of the suggestions I would have is if you would look at economic development, every economic development group in the state has had experience with businesses discussing coming to Wyoming. And there's 2 or 3 things that always come up. And one is the facilities that might be available to house the business, if you will. The second is, are the utilities available? We found that to be a big deal with the computer system in the Cheyenne area. And the third is the manpower there to handle the business. And I think that's a big one for your business that you're running here, your 20, 25 people that you're trying to hire. I think that's one of the big considerations is, does a local community have the manpower for you to do it rather than having to bring it in from out of the area like we're doing with our state health facilities. We're bringing nurses from all over the state to try to fill those spots. So I think that's three things you need to look at. I think a couple of them are pretty well done there at Guernsey, but that third one with manpower, you're really lacking. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, hey, thank you very much for the input. What's surprising is in that turnover rate, the qualifications to be a cadet team leader aren't extremely high. Age 21, high school diploma, pretty clean background record, but some of those are waiverable. So it is surprising that the turnover rate is so high. But thank you, sir, and we'll certainly take that under consideration and look at those three factors.
Representative Laux.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I just want to go back to the other subject. In order, the bottom line is, I mean, I really want to see what the fruit of this program is before I can get behind it. We've been running it for quite a while, and I appreciate Greg commenting on that, because yes, we've talked about this before, but there's got to be a mechanism, because if the fruit of this is there's only 5% of these kids that are really find success as they get out of the program, and then I don't know if we should keep doing it. We need to be able to measure what we've done and be able to show the fruit. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I guess I would like to enter into it a little bit here too. I know of two of these young people that have gone through your program, and both of them have struggled. They were really struggling before they went in. I would guess that nearly all of the cadets you have some kind of issues. In fact, I've only run into one that didn't have major issues, just didn't want to go to school anymore and wanted to get his GED and be done. But most of them come in with some problems, and in a few weeks there, you're just not able to straighten out all of them. I do think the discipline was helpful for the two that I know of. There's a third one I could check on. I think the GED is huge for any of them. That's one of the things that I believe all of them come out with. And so I would say that. I'd also say, though, that moving it from Guernsey to a place with more manpower is a huge step. It's a big deal for the community of Guernsey. General Alkire, I'm guessing you're part of the trucking family from Torrington, and you're at home here, and there are other people that base has provided jobs for people in the area for a long time. It is disappointing to see this kind of.
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, I can't lay claim to the Torrington roots. I'm from Evanston. So as unique as the name is, I'm
going to have it affected my.
I can't. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
My mind just went unstable. Go ahead and repeat yourself. I don't know what happened.
Mr. Chairman, I cannot lay claim to the Torrington Trucking Alkire family. My family's from Evanston. And so I do know a Lieutenant Colonel Alkire who's from that region. And frankly, I'm a little better looking. That's how we distinguish between the both of us.
Whoa, I'm going to make sure he knows about that. Toby's not going to be happy.
Well, that was a presumption on my part that I shouldn't. I've never heard the name Alkire except mentioned in Goshen County there. Platte County is close. So I guess if there are no more input by the committee, I would just say God bless you as you try to make that transition and come up with the best decision for that academy. It is a much beloved academy by the legislature, but as Representative Laux said, we would like to see good results too. So I guess we'll continue on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're coming close to the end. I think we have two issues finally to deal with. We're on the slide that says impacts of military requirements of 2020 on Senate File 36. And then right after that is the joint resolution discussion. So I'm going to turn this over to Colonel Chris Smith, and we'll get you to the end of our presentation today.
Thank you, General. Mr. Chairman, these are two interim topics that were in the committee's letter to the Management Council. They weren't necessarily on the agenda, but we wanted to address them in where we are.
Oh, no.
So the first one is the impacts of the military requirements in Senate File 36 in the last session, which involved large-scale solar and wind energy facilities. And as everybody on the committee probably is well aware, the thrust of Senate File 36 was really active duty federal military launch and control facilities, the impact that these large-scale solar and wind energy facilities could have on those operations. I mean, we're really talking about F.E. Warren's operations within Wyoming. They, of course, have facilities in Wyoming, Nebraska, and Colorado. It really had a two-stage potential impact. One is within 5 miles of such a launch or control facility, the commander had to get notice. The second was if it was within 2 nautical miles of that kind of facility, the applicant for the project would have to not only give notice to the commander, but also seek a statement of no adverse impact on their emissions. When we look, the thrust of this is whether or not it, as I understood it, was whether it had any impact on the Wyoming Military Department's operations. As anybody who has looked at the solar and wind energy facilities is probably well aware, there is an impact on our aviation missions or potential impact depending on the location. We have our UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters out of F.E. Warren, and then of course our C-130s here in Cheyenne. We have looked at some of the wind facilities in Laramie County. There are currently at least 3 projects I'm aware of southwest of F.E. Warren Air Force Base between F.E. Warren, the city of Cheyenne, and the Colorado border. The problem with those facilities for us really has to do with approaches and takeoff and landings, both from the airport for the 130s and at the aviation facility on F.E. Warren, where the Army Guards Black Hawk helicopters are. But one thing that is not always well known that the Senate file doesn't really address is those wind facilities southwest of the base do have a direct impact on the weather radar that NOAA operates at the airport, because they're tall enough and they move the air enough that it is hard for the weather radar to see through it. And it is the direction that violent storms, particularly in the spring and summer, come from. So there is an impact there. But this bill doesn't really address that. It really is only looking at the nuclear enterprise. This was part or is part of a national effort. As you can imagine, these launch and control facilities really sit on easements that were established as far back as the 50s, and almost all of them in the 60s. At that time, large-scale solar and wind facilities weren't really an issue. Alternate energy wasn't as big a deal as it is today, certainly for our state. So now that these are cropping up, anybody who's driven the highway across Nebraska or Kansas has seen the incredible amount of wind turbines that can exist. Obviously, for the missile community, the ability to respond by helicopter to these launch and control facilities is critical in an emergency situation. And so having these very high wind and solar facilities is a very big deal. So the bottom line, looking at this issue as it applies to the Wyoming Military Department, we don't see that the Senate File 36 has really any impact on us, because it was really focused on active duty missile facilities. Currently, any of those projects around our aviation resources here in Laramie County and Cheyenne has to go through the FAA. And there is also a Federal Aviation and Installation Clearinghouse the governor gets notice. The governor's office routinely contacts us and asks us our opinion on them. And so there is already a mechanism for us to get notice of these facilities around Cheyenne. So the bottom line is we don't see any further action with regard to Senate File 36 in the last session for the Wyoming Military Department. As a former active duty member at FE Warren and a member of the missile community, I totally understand the issue, and I'm glad that the state took some steps to get them involved in the siting of these, because they could have an impact on those federal missile facilities. So with that, I'll stand with the committee's questions.
Committee, any questions?
Mr. Chairman, just a quick one.
Yeah, go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you. Colonel Smith, I struggled with this one a lot during session. Struggled with the fact that the state of Wyoming is now put in place to take care of a federal issue, federal land siting issue. And I have yet to see anybody in this committee. Now, from what I understand, I did go look up the committee meeting in which this was held in from the Joint Corporations Committee, but I have yet to see anybody from our active duty base here come to this committee and explain to us. They've solely relied upon our state to really put this forward. What kind of discussions have you been in as the only person who has come forward to this committee to explain what's going on and how this has affected their mission? What kind of discussions have you personally been involved with the 20th Air Force and what's going on with the 20th Air Force as you're the state representative coming forward for a federal issue?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, obviously very good questions. And I don't want to misrepresent myself to the committee. I certainly do not represent the active duty folks at FE Warren. As this committee is well aware, over the years, the Adjutant General, starting really with General Reiner and certainly with General Porter, we try to address military issues to this committee and be available to you to answer questions to the best of our ability. To that end, I have had a few discussions with the 90th Missile Wing Civil Engineering section. Most of those discussions were about the local Laramie County projects. We did touch on this particular endeavor, and I did see, some language circulating nationally on the active duty Air Force in the missile community seeking these kind of aids to minimize the disruption on the federal mission. To that end, I can't say I had a lot of discussions, and we certainly, if the committee so desired, we could certainly get with Colonel Benetti, the current wing commander at FE Warren, and have them come and do a presentation to the committee about the details of this. We weren't involved when Senate File 36 went through hearings, so I'm just trying to address what our committee asked us to do.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Hey, thank you. And Colonel Smith, I kind of put you in a sticky situation there. I do apologize on that. And personally, at this point, I don't think it's worth it for us to hear any more explanation. The law is the law. I can tell you personally, I have been involved with Senator Barrasso and Senator Enzi's office on this, trying to get some information forward from the federal delegation. Again, I'm really bothered. I don't have a problem with us fixing and having no wind farms within a mile or so, or 2 miles, or whatever we want to put in front of those missile silos or the launch control facilities. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is the fact that the state had to fix a federal issue. And I've really been bothered by that since day one. And unfortunately, I think this should have been kind of a dual committee issue, but this was taken through joint corporations. And we had the 20th Air Force did come forward to the joint corporations. They did give them all that information, but then the bill came to our committee and we were asked to bring it out of committee without any of the background information. So just kind of a little bit of a heads up to you as this moves forward, some of the consternation that you're probably hearing or may hear in the future, that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, we heard from the 20th Air Force on the Senate side. And I also attended the corporations meeting where the 20th presented. I thought it was pretty well presented and pretty well done. I don't know what happened on the House side, but on the Senate side, I thought it was pretty well covered.
So I guess yeah, we did not. We heard quite a little bit from the private sector that was affected by it. And I'm curious as to whether that testimony ever happened on the Senate side or in the corporations.
Mr. Chairman, I think corporations did hear a little bit, and I think the Senate heard some of the issues with the private sector. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll continue the conversation. I'm not convinced that the state of Wyoming has any right to be giving up somebody else's property rights. So I guess I've been vocal on that. But after the last couple of months, I'm just not sure what rights we do have, if any. So we'll kind of leave it at that. And thank you for your input. Anything else? Okay, let's move on.
All right, Mr. Chairman, the next slide is the other interim topic, which regarded the possibility of the committee supporting a joint resolution for hyperbaric oxygen treatment of traumatic brain injuries by the VA. And this was an interesting topic. I talked to some of our doctors involved with the Guard, and the hyperbaric oxygen treatment, which is exactly what most of you probably think it is. It's the whole divers coming up too fast and getting the bends and having to go into a tank at a high pressure, high oxygen to drive the nitrogen out of their system. It is literally that treatment from the 50s and 60s. When there are some studies out there and some groundbreaking work, according to our docs, that some people who have traumatic brain injuries from combat operations in Asia have seen some significant, in some cases, benefit from hyperbaric oxygen treatment. The VA has not been willing to pay for that treatment. And part of that problem apparently is, it's amazing what you can find out, the FDA has not approved it for TBI treatment, and therefore, if it's not an approved treatment through the FDA, private insurance companies won't pay for it. So while there's some research on it, and it looks like in some cases it's very beneficial and people actually benefit greatly, and it certainly helps our military members who suffer from TBIs. The opinion from the medical docs I talked to is that a joint resolution encouraging the VA to consider every treatment option for TBIs in particular would be very beneficial as a statement of the Wyoming legislature's support for veterans who suffer from these fairly traumatic injuries in many cases. But in terms of pressing for this particular treatment, it may be a little too premature, because while the VA can do whatever they want as a federal entity, they don't have to follow FDA guidelines, from what I understand. It's still, our recommendation remains a joint resolution encouraging every treatment option for our military members by the VA would certainly be welcome. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for your questions. And by the way, I do want to tell the committee, I only pretend I know what I'm talking about with medical stuff, because as an attorney, I think I know everything. But with that, I'll stand for your questions.
Yes. We have a few in the House and the Senate, so we know all about that. All right, Senator Steinmetz, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a topic that was brought to us by Doug Chamberlain here in Goshen County, and he has a group, and more information if we need that in our September meeting to decide how to proceed. It is a cutting edge treatment, it sounds like, and maybe we could do that letter you're suggesting and then add this part into that, but it's something they're passionate about. And if you'd like more information, we can surely get it for you. That's where this issue came from.
Okay. So would the House like to recommend that we have a bill with that resolution? I mean, I'm sorry. Let me start over. Let me get over this again here. I'd like to have either comments or recommendations by the committee on whether to draft a bill for this resolution. Go ahead, Representative Brown.
I say let's do it, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so it's.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, okay, go ahead. Let's have a little more discussion and then we'll do a straw poll. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I think the priority number 3 says you'll whether a joint resolution may be needed regarding hyperbaric, not a bill.
Okay. We've got resolutions that were bills, so I'll let Colonel Smith weigh in on it. We could probably just pass it around too. I don't know. Neither of them have a lot of influence, is what I understand. Well, they have some influence. They just don't have a whole lot of clout. Go ahead, Colonel Smith.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll certainly defer to our LSO folks about the difference between a resolution and a bill and whether a bill is necessary for a joint resolution. So Heather, I see you.
All right, more discussion before we do a straw poll. Okay, not seeing any. All those in favor of this resolution, raise your hands. And there are 11 here. I believe it passes fine, so we'll go ahead and do that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate the committee's continued support for our veterans.
Thank you. So is that everything that the military guardsmen had for us?
Mr. Chairman, General Porter, yes, sir. That concludes our presentation today.
Okay. Thank you, soldiers. We appreciate what you do for us. Thank you for coming to the meeting. Thank you. When you see our veterans around, tell them we appreciate all of what they've done. So a little direction from the committee. I think we can push through the last of this without taking a lunch break. I think I'd like to take a 10-minute break if that's okay. Maybe a straw poll. I've been to meetings where we pushed through the lunch break and didn't get done till 6 o'clock, and I don't see that happening here. So, but I've no assurances. I think I can get her done quicker than that. Are we okay? Can we do a 10-minute break and then come back and finish the meeting without lunch? It looks like pretty much everybody's fine with that. I'll see you in 10 minutes. I think we're all coming back. I'm going to call this meeting back to order. So the next item we have for consideration is commercial licensing of 3-axle farm trucks. And in the waiting room, I'm trying to, I think I'll start with Brett Moline. If you could come into the meeting, I think would be the next one I'd like to hear from. Item we have for consideration is commercial licensing of 3-axle farm trucks. Oh dear, I am.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay. I was trying to get out of my YouTube because I know if you have them both on, it gets discombobulated. Are we good?
Hang on. We're checking to see if there's a quorum. I believe we got everybody or enough folks. And it's time to start. So let's go ahead and start. Go ahead, Mr. Moline.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. This is an issue that some of my members brought forward, is that it appears, at least for some counties, that if you have a 3-axle truck or a 2-axle truck that has a gross vehicle weight rating above 26,000 pounds, that you have to license that truck commercially. Okay, with the farm vehicle, we have the restriction, you're hauling your own goods, your own truck, just within the state or within 150 air miles of your domicile. And the question I have, and Mr. Rossetti from the YDOT and I visited, is that a requirement that a vehicle designated as a farm vehicle, would that 3-axle truck have to be licensed commercially? And if it does, is there a way that we can come up with an exemption? It seems a little ironic to me that something that's designated non-commercial would have to have a commercial plate. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
Okay, I guess. So we were going to have Taylor Rossetti come on. Debbie Lopez, how are you doing? I think I'm on, okay. I think we'll have YDOT talk for a minute, and then we have a member of the public that would like to talk. And I guess I need to know what all we're dealing with here. Go ahead, YDOT. Also, we have David Wagner, so you two choose.
Mr. Chairman, Debbie Lopez from YDOT. There's a definition of a commercial vehicle in the law, and it's 31.1.101A little I. And it basically says if the vehicle is used, designed, or maintained as a commercial vehicle, then would have to have, I mean, that's just what the definition is.
Yeah.
A power unit having 2 axles, gross vehicle weight 26,000 pounds, or a power unit having 3 or more axles regardless of weight. There is an exemption in the Wyoming statutes for fees. So if you're a farmer carrying your own goods, you only have to pay 25% of the state fee. And there's also an exemption based on mileage, the number of miles operated. So if, depending on how much the farm vehicle is operated, 2,500 miles or less, they only have to pay 15% of the state fee. And then that exemption goes up to 30,000 miles in a year. They only have to pay 75% of the state fee. So I'm not sure if this is about fees or something else.
Okay. Representative Laux, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was asking if Debbie would repeat that. I'm trying to find the statutes. 31.1, what was it?
1A.
The definition of a commercial vehicle, 31.1.101A little I.
Okay. So, it has a definition of what the commercial vehicle is, but it doesn't have a definition of what that commercial vehicle could be for. I guess that's what is confusing to me. So I believe, and I don't know whether it was our county treasurer, farm vehicles, I think, and somebody can straighten me out on this, they can be licensed in the regular fashion that a passenger car would be licensed in, including up to the semis, I think. There is no 25% exemption in that cost or that price. It can also, the farm vehicle can be registered as commercial, and then you can apply for a 25% discount. And I think in walking through this with our own treasurer, I think, and a while back that we did this. So we have a couple of small trucks that are registered commercial because it was cheaper to do it that way, but we didn't apply for the 25. I know we didn't do that, the 25% discount. Maybe that's what we should have done. Is there a problem? And I'm going to bring a member of the public in here in just a minute, what problems he might have experienced. And I'm guessing it has to do with crossing state lines. But I think within Wyoming, that 150-mile radius, if I understand things correctly, WYDOT can look into this while we're continuing the conversation. They agree that within Wyoming, we're okay to have a commercially licensed 3-axle trailer that can be used within that 150-mile radius, but only within Wyoming. And then I'm going to bring on, don't have anything else from the committee. I'm going to bring on Mr. Umble. I pronounce your name correctly. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, thank you for coming to our meeting. Go
Yes,
ahead.
absolutely. So my concerns are, and you are right, some of it is crossing state lines. So I'll just give you a little background on me. I farm and also run a commercial trucking company, do both. So essentially, we actually have two different entities. We have a commercially licensed trucks, and we do commercial transportation, but we also farm. And I farm up here by Torrington, Wyoming, right along the border. A lot of our commodities, let me rephrase that. Nearly all of our farm commodities go either into Nebraska, and a lot of our hay goes down into Colorado. So the issue that we run into when you're talking about farm plates, the state of Wyoming does not actually give out or submit. Let me say not submit. They don't designate a farm vehicle. So in the state of Wyoming, your county plate, for example, says it's a commercial vehicle, but they will give you a sticker for your plate for it to say farm. Now, the problem that we run into is the state of Nebraska does not recognize that as a farm plate. So if you wanted to run into Nebraska, then you have to go ahead and also get another plate in the state of Nebraska and run 2 plates and pay double fees. The double fees thing to me is not even a problem. It's part of it is the hassle that it is to do. But what we run into also is it conflicts and causes us farmers a problem when we start looking at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has laid out all the things that a farm vehicle is exempt from, and also drivers. So if you're driving a farm vehicle, if it is you own it, you are an employee of the farm or a relative of the farm, you do not need a CDL. The problem is there that Wyoming technically, according to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, does not have a farm designation because it doesn't say so on the registration. It is a commercial registration with a farm sticker. And I believe that would also, if the state of Wyoming could issue farm plates or in a farm registration, then it would also get rid of the issue of going into Nebraska, because I've been in touch with Senator Erdman from Nebraska. He is out of Bayard. I actually have a unique situation. I farm kind of both sides of the border and I live in Nebraska. So I'm actually one of his constituents. I farm in Wyoming and pay my property taxes here. And so I kind of understand both of how both systems operate. Mr. Erdman was trying to work on it from the Nebraska end as far as how Wyoming and Nebraska could recognize each other's farm plates. And what he came to was that Wyoming doesn't offer a farm plate. And so there's therefore nothing that he can do about it. I know that's a lot of information. If you have questions, I can expand on some things. One more thing real quick is also I guess I elaborated just a little bit on what the Federal Motor Carrier, the FMCSA and the DOT what they do as far as exemptions for drivers, but there's also a lot of exemptions on trucks as far as what is needed with having inspections every year and other things that aren't required as a farm. So,
Okay, Senator Anderson, you've got a question. Go ahead.
Chairman, when you say we don't have a farm plate, is that we don't have a farm plate for a triple axle truck or a commercial truck? Is that because we do have farm plates for what I think of as a farm truck, but maybe not for the bigger trucks?
Mr. Humble, can you answer that?
I can answer part of it. I do not know if there is a farm plate for smaller trucks. We run tractor trailer combinations. And so a 3-axle tractor with a trailer, I know there is not a farm plate for that. It's been an issue that we've run into for several years. So sorry, I forgot one thing. One of the other issues that we come to with drivers, sorry, Chairman, if you want to go somewhere else.
Go ahead. We're here to get information. Thank you, sir.
Okay, one of the other issues that we run into with drivers, and it's not the fact that getting a CDL is a problem. I have actually trained several drivers and they've gotten CDLs, but now in the state of Wyoming, it is harder to get a CDL, not because of the rules necessarily, but because of the amount of CDL inspectors that they are, people that actually give the test. So I think this was been a few months ago because I had a driver get a CDL and I took him down there and trained. I live in Torrington. The closest place you can go is Cheyenne or to Casper to get a test done, and you have to schedule it. It took us over a week and a half to schedule an appointment to get one. And then if the driver doesn't pass the test, which happens commonly with CDLs because there's part of some of the things in the skills test that are hard to manage, then you have to schedule another appointment. It ends up costing a lot of time and money. So it becomes hard to get a CDL. And where the FMCSA and the Department of Transportation gives us the exemption, we're just not allowed to use it. So, okay. Senator Anderson, if you had another question about farm plates, that's kind of what I know. If you have anything else, I could try to expand on it for you.
I can answer a little bit of, and YDOT, anytime you need to come into this conversation, go ahead and do it. Senator Anderson, what we issue is not really a farm plate. You've got either the regular plate and you've got a commercial plate. And then we've got these little stickers that we're allowed to get if we are a farm operation. Now, I wasn't aware that we couldn't put those stickers on a commercial plate licensed in Wyoming. So I guess if we had maybe some direction from YDOT, or we can research that, that's part of what we might need to do before we go into any required legislation to fix this problem. Go ahead, Ms. Lopez.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, it's the county level that actually issues the sticker, so I'm not sure who they would give it to, but when I look at the law, it says it shall be issued upon request for trucks and trailers by any farmer. So that tells me it would work on a commercial, the sticker. I mean, but it sounds like, I mean, I'm not sure how it works in the real world, what that sticker really does for the customer.
Okay, and that's what I was thinking. I thought we were okay. Mr. Moline, you're wanting to get into this conversation, aren't you?
Well, Mr. Chairman, from what I heard the gentleman from Torrington say, that one of the problems is, since it's not a plate, it's just a sticker, that Nebraska is not recognizing that as a farm vehicle. But I thought that it just had to be a designation, not a plate. Is the way the Federal Motor Carrier Act reads. Maybe I'm mistaken on that.
Oh boy. Okay. So I guess I'm wondering if the counties can issue with each of these plates, whether it's a commercial plate, and we're just talking, okay, I'm going to bring Mr. Humble back in so that I'm clear on what I'm saying. Are you still, yes, there you are. Go ahead, Mr. Humble. Talk to me a little bit. Your problem is with a reciprocity problem between the state of Wyoming and Nebraska, correct?
And also the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and the Department of Transportation. I was trying to find the part in Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. I had it earlier this morning when I was looking it up. It does, and it gives a definition of a designated farm vehicle. I'm trying to find that, but a designated farm vehicle, it needs to say, according to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and the Department of Transportation, it would solve all the problems if it was actually a registration that said farm instead of a sticker. I believe would solve the problem. I'm trying, let's see here. Go ahead, I'll see if I can find it.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Chairman?
So go ahead, Mr. Moline.
Mr. Chairman, what I'm hearing is that we designate the plate, we put the sticker on the plate. As a question, are we also putting the designation on the registration that you have to carry with your, that you put in your glove box? Is that farm designation on the registration as well, or is it just on the plate?
On ours, it is not on the registration. I could check that. So I'm just kind of working off the cuff. You're talking about one little branch. But I think what Ms. Lopez communicated was that we may not need a bill so much as we might need some designation on the registration, which I don't think. It may come down to a county level. I'm not just sure how we work it. What I'll tell you is the treasurer in my county, and I think most counties are good as long as they get their, as long as we pay for these registrations. They get. Representative Newsom, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just looked up the Motor Vehicle Safety, Federal Motor Vehicle Act. And it says that under a covered farm vehicle, if it has a license plate or some other means specified by the state that identifies it as a farm vehicle. So I would think the sticker would do that.
I think I could kind of play the devil's advocate on that. Is these stickers are not hard to come by, and a person running commercially could stick one of those things on, and that could be the problem that Nebraska Department of Transportation would have, maybe Wyoming's too. I'm not real sure of that. Mr. Humble, can you enter that conversation? Do you think that might have been what the problem was? They wouldn't recognize a sticker?
I do believe that that is the problem. They don't recognize the sticker. I believe that I would go look at one of my trucks because they're sitting right here in the yard, but none of them are licensed farm plates because we can't do that for our operation. It doesn't work. So I can't look at my registration and tell you what it says. I believe that the license plate does, even if you have a farm plate, it still says a commercial plate, and then it has a farm sticker on it. I think that I don't know who would do this. I think the best thing to do would be to get in touch with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They have an office in Cheyenne, and those guys are very intelligent, very easy to get along with. They know lots of information. They would be able to direct somebody at the state level as to what they require from their end to recognize a farm vehicle, more so than us speculating. I know that and exactly what she read is exactly right. That is exactly what it says. I looked at it while she was reading it, but the state or the federal regulations, I think, do not recognize that as a farm plate.
Okay, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett, this question is probably directed at you. So I recognize that we've got Mr. Humble here, but it clearly has been a larger issue to bring it to your level and have you as an association bringing it forward. What type of a level of issue is this? Are we seeing this widespread up in the Bighorn Basin as well? Are we seeing this, just one or two pickpocketed counties? Like, what are we looking at here, and how large of an issue is this statewide? First question.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it seems to be kind of hit and miss amongst the counties. But, going back to my original question that I haven't gotten answered yet, the question is, if it is designated as a farm vehicle in Wyoming, does it need to have a commercial plate? And I haven't gotten an answer to that question. That was my original question. I recognize if you're not for hire or you are commercial, you need a commercial plate. My question is, if you are a designated farm vehicle in Wyoming, do you have to have a commercial plate if your vehicle has a weight rating over 26,000 pounds, or if it's 3-axle? That's the original question.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, follow up on that.
Go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, so I think that's actually the issue here. I think we've got a little bit of two dueling issues here with Mr. Umble's concern spreading across state lines, and what we've got going on state lines, I think, is kind of a little bit more minutia. I think we're getting in a little bit deeper into the weeds on that level. I think your question is probably more directed at exactly like what we need to find out, whether or not we need to find, and I'm seeing Ms. Lopez shaking her head, so I'm wondering if maybe she can answer that for us. But I'm wondering if we need to clean up statute, and if that's the case, maybe we need to do that. But it seems to me that statute's pretty clear.
Okay, Senator Anderson. I'll get to everybody, don't worry. You're muted, sir, Senator.
That.
There you go.
He muted me. Somebody muted me. Anyway.
It was me.
Mr. Chairman, looks to me like we need to get a little group together to talk about this and figure out what's going on here. It sounds like the trucking industry needs to be in on it. The WYDOT and the Farm Bureau needs to be in on it, and maybe Mr. Humble to discuss what the problem is and what we need to do. Maybe we need a whole new plate that says farm on it or something. I don't know what the answer is, but we sure need to get to the bottom of this. I think it sounds like, and it may be just a Nebraska problem. Mr. Humble, I think, runs into Colorado, and he didn't mention anything about Colorado. I haven't heard anything about running into Utah, Idaho, or Montana, or South Dakota. So maybe we just have an issue with Nebraska, but I think we need to get a group together to look into this and maybe not do it on this.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for Mr. Humble. What exactly is happening when you go to Nebraska? Are you being fined? Are you being told you can't come into the state? What exactly is happening?
Excuse me. Yeah, so actually you can be fined for not having the license plate if you run into the state of Nebraska. And this has been an ongoing problem we have lived in this area since the mid-90s, 1994, and it has been an ongoing problem, I know, then. So it's not something that's just new as far as the state-to-state issue is concerned.
Mr. Humble, I'm not real sure, but I think you cut out on the middle of the license plate part. We may have missed part of what you were saying.
So what you will be fined if you do not have a Nebraska plate if you go into Wyoming and all you have is a Wyoming plate.
Okay, Senator Hutchins.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Humble, you said there was an issue because you live in Nebraska, but you farm in Wyoming. Wyoming, your sticker and everything seems to work fine. What is the problem with just getting the farm plate from Nebraska, if that can be done?
having two plates. Is that your question? Is that what you're wondering, is what is the problem with having two plates?
Pretty much, if it would be an easy fix.
Okay, so then you have to pay so essentially you're paying registration twice, number one. Number two is then it becomes just as costly as it does to be a private carrier. Private carrier still hauls their own goods, but then they fall under more regulations.
Okay. Senator Hutchings.
One more, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What about you register your vehicle in Nebraska? What would be the problem if you came to Wyoming?
It's the same problem.
Plate.
So, yes, so if you actually have a Nebraska plate and you come to Wyoming, it's the same thing. You will be fined and you have to get a Wyoming plate. Or you have to get I don't remember this, don't quote me on this, that I believe you can get a trip permit to run into Wyoming if you have a Nebraska plate, but you will have to do that every time that you come to the state.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And that permit you're talking about is would be a farm non-commercial operator. Because you're one of the first people I've heard of that when you are a commercial, you've got your CDL and you operate commercially. Well, no, you're not. I know the complications here, but it'll take too long to explain it. I think Senator Anderson had a pretty good suggestion. Did Mrs. Lopez have anything to add? Okay. I do believe we probably need to get a working group together and figure out just what the problem is. It began as 3-axle trucks, and I thought that there was going to be specifically that problem, 3-axle trucks, but it's not. It's a little bigger problem, and I thought we had reciprocity for private farm operations within 150 miles of home with the other states. But I guess we may need to research that more. I do know Senator Erdman, and I would be more than willing to have a conversation with him to try to figure out how we're going to craft a bill. But I think we need to move this discussion maybe to the next meeting. Would the committee be okay with that? Rather than deciding anything today. Raise your hand if you're okay with that. Okay, I'm not sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think we have enough. I have not. Oh, there's 10 then.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Moline.
I think you're exactly right. And as you know, Senator Anderson, I think he's got a fantastic idea. I thought this was a pretty simple question, but evidently it's not. So I am very willing to work with a group to answer the 3 or 4 questions that have come up.
There's nothing simple about farming, I guarantee you. Okay.
Only the exemptions, Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, you got Heather trying to get your attention.
Yes, Heather, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, did the committee want to request that Mr. Moline, Mr. Umble, and Ms. Lopez and Mr. Wagoner be the base for this group to discuss to then present in September? And if so, did they want to, I heard you say that you would be speaking with some people too. I just didn't know if you wanted to designate some folks as the people from whom you would like to hear in September after they've met.
Okay, Representative Laux.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, but we need to include the Wyoming Trucking Association, as noted.
Okay. All right. So are you good, Heather? We have direction. I think we'll kind of put you in charge of it, Mr. Moline. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to provide all of the contact information to Mr. Moline of the people here on this call. And then it sounds like, and then also most likely Katie Legursky. Would that sound like the correct person from the Trucking Association, Representative Laux?
Sheila
Furch.
Furch.
Yeah,
Oh, Sheila Schwartz. Okay. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
wrong
Katie is
person.
the contractor.
Contractors.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
All right, so unless we have, and I don't see anybody in the bullpen over there, I think are there members of, oh, go ahead, Senator Pappas. Didn't mean to.
Yeah, just on that last item, I can certainly, if you'd like, the Federal Motor Vehicle Carriers Association is a tenant of mine in my building. I can go talk with them. And
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think the Federal Motor Carrier is going to have a seat at this table too, to the answer to these questions about being able to go across state lines.
All right. So I think we are done with that. Let me look here. So I think we're finished with the 3-axle truck, and now we need some directives from the committee to the staff. What do you have, Heather? Go ahead. Heather?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, so that Mr. Moline and Mr. Umbel, Ms. Lopez, Mr. Wagoner, and all of the people who are also going to be joining them, I wanted to let folks know that the September meeting is scheduled for, I'm trying to click it at the same time, is scheduled for the 21st and 22nd of September. So I'll send a message to put everyone in contact and to hopefully have some discussions between now and then to be able to come to that meeting. And we do not yet know whether that meeting will be in person or this way on the Zoom.
Oh, I hope by then we're back to a more normal setting myself, but that's an opinion. I should shut up.
And then, Mr. Chairman, I believe that you also were trying to get committee directives.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do a recap like I did yesterday as far as of the legislation that the committee chose to move forward with today. And that is to work with the military department to revise, restructure the military code, to extend the preferences to out-of-state Wyoming National Guard members, and to do a joint resolution for the TBI treatment. And then I just was going to facilitate, not by any means staff or anything, but this working group of folks for the 3-axle issue. And then I wanted to remind the committee of the next meeting that's online starting at 8:30 in the morning on July 10th. That's everything I had. And that meeting is focused specifically on highway funding. And the committee will have lots of materials to review before then.
Mr. Chairman, what is the September 10th meeting?
Heather.
Mr. Chairman, that's July 10th for highway funding, and it's a half-day meeting starting at 8:30. The September meeting is a regular meeting of 21st and 22nd of September. And that's when we will be looking at some of the legislation from this 2-day meeting. We will address any topics that hadn't yet been addressed, as well as over the past couple of days, several things have been designated to come back and report back to the committee at that time.
Okay, so I guess I'd have a questions. The July 10th meeting was assigned to us by Management Council, and it's not related to, I thought it was going to be some COVID related issues, but probably not then.
Mr. Chairman, the committee addressed some COVID topics during this meeting, which then took away the time designated to address its #1 priority of the highway funding topic. And so that, through discussions between the chairman and the director Reiner, is how the July 10th meeting came about. To meet virtually via Zoom.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So.
Mr. Chairman.
8:30, it's not on this, who's, representing Brown. Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna see if you wanted to let any of the guests, we've still got Mr. Lopez and Miss Lopez and Mr. Humble still sitting on the, in the queue here. I didn't know if you wanted to maybe let them know that we probably will not need them, as well as Captain Wagner.
I'm not sure I understand. Landon.
Mr. Chairman, we've got people that are sitting here, waiting to testify any longer if we need them to testify, but I don't believe we're taking any more testimony for the rest of the day.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming. I think we're about to adjourn, so am I correct? We're not done. Mr. Wagner, go ahead. Are you waving goodbye?
Yes, Chairman, just waving goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Debbie. Okay, so staff, are we finished then with this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that Mr. Humble may have something. Oh, no, I think he was waving.
Okay. All right, committee, do you have anything more?
Just have a great weekend, all y'all.
Yes, good to see you all. I hope we're back together again in person. Well, it won't be next time, but soon. Bye.
You did great, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Enjoy your families and stay safe, y'all, man.